book was in the attic of the house on Spinner's End, in a trunk that had belonged to Snape's mother, wrapped in cloth that smelled like mothballs and the particular acrid dust that accumulated in houses where nobody had been happy for a very long time. Severus Snape found it in August, the summer before Harry Potter's third year, while clearing the house after his father's death. Tobias Snape had died in June, alone in the kitchen, and the dying had been as unremarkable as the living. A man who had been angry for 60 years finally running out of anger and blood pressure simultaneously. The funeral had been attended by Severus and a neighbour who came for the sandwiches. The house needed clearing. The house needed burning, if Snape was being honest, but burning a house required emotional commitment, and Snape's emotional commitments were fully allocated, so clearing would have to suffice. He worked through the rooms methodically, the way he worked through everything, with precision and without sentiment. The kitchen, the sitting room, the bedrooms, the attic. The trunk was his mother's, Eileen Prince, who had married a muggle and regretted it and spent 20 years regretting it, and then died of the regretting or the pneumonia, whichever had arrived first. The trunk contained robes, a wand that no longer worked, 3 bottles of perfume that had gone rancid, and a book. The book was old. Not Hogwarts library old, not rare bookshop old. The book was old in the way that certain magical objects were old, the oldness radiating from the binding like heat from a stone that had been sitting in the sun for centuries. The cover was leather, cracked, unmarked. The pages were vellum. The text was in a script that Snape did not immediately recognise, which was unusual because Snape recognised most scripts. He sat on the attic floor, in the dust and the mothball smell, and opened the book and began to read. Reading it took 3 days. Understanding it took considerably longer. Tonight we are following what happens when the most complicated man at Hogwarts finds the most dangerous book in Britain, and what the finding does to the war, the school, and the man himself. Settle in, and let's begin. The book was written in an archaic form of Latin, crossed with something older, something that Snape eventually identified as a pre-Roman magical script used by the magical communities of Iron Age Britain. The script was not taught at Hogwarts. The script was not taught anywhere. The script existed in fragments in the British Museum's restricted magical archive, untranslated, unread, because the number of people in Britain who could read it was approximately 0. Snape could read it because his mother had taught him. Not directly, not deliberately. Eileen Prince had spoken fragments of the old language when she was angry or frightened, the way bilingual people reverted to their first language under stress. Snape had absorbed the fragments the way children absorbed everything, unconsciously, incompletely, enough to recognise the shapes if not the full meanings. The book's first pages described the world before the classification, before the ministry, before Hogwarts, before the statute of secrecy, before the distinction between magical and non-magical society. There had been practitioners, not wizards and witches, those were later terms. Practitioners, people who worked with the forces that ran through the earth and the air and the water, forces that responded to human will and human emotion and the complex, unpredictable intersection of the two. The practitioners had no schools. The practitioners had no curricula. The practitioners had the world and the forces and the practice, which was passed from practitioner to practitioner through demonstration and experience, the way blacksmithing was passed from smith to smith, and midwifery from midwife to midwife. The practice was not divided into categories. The practice was the practice. Light and dark were later inventions, administrative tools, the equivalent of painting a line down the middle of a river and declaring one side good water and the other side bad water. The river did not recognize the line. The water was the water. The magic was the magic. The classification came with the institutions. When the practitioners formed schools, the schools needed curricula, and curricula needed categories, and categories needed boundaries. The boundaries were, this magic is permitted, this magic is forbidden. The boundary was the control, and the control was the power, and the power was the institution. The practitioners who refused the classification were persecuted. The persecution was not violent at first. The persecution was administrative, exclusion from the schools, denial of access to institutional resources, the slow bureaucratic marginalization of anyone who practiced outside the categories. The persecution became violent later, when the institutions discovered that administrative marginalization was insufficient to suppress practices that operated outside administrative control. The Covenant practitioners were the most persecuted, because the Covenant practitioners were the most dangerous to institutional power. The Covenant magic could not be taught in schools because the magic could not be standardized. The magic responded to the individual practitioner's emotional truth, and emotional truth was, by definition, individual, which meant the magic could not be reduced to a curriculum. A curriculum required reproducibility. Covenant magic was not reproducible. Each covenant was unique, shaped by the specific emotional offering of the specific practitioner. The way each fire was unique, shaped by the specific fuel and the specific conditions. You could teach someone to make a fire. You could not teach them to make your fire. You could teach someone to make a covenant. You could not teach them to make your covenant. That unreproducibility was the threat. Institutional power depended on the ability to control what was taught, and the ability to control what was taught depended on the ability to standardize what was taught, and covenant magic could not be standardized. Therefore, covenant magic was suppressed. Therefore, the practitioners were persecuted. Therefore, the books were confiscated and the knowledge driven underground, into families, into trunks, into attics, into Spinner's End. The book described a form of magic that Snape had never encountered in any curriculum, any library, any discussion with Dumbledore or Voldemort or any of the highly educated magical practitioners he had spent his adult life among. The book described magic based not on intent and wand work, the standard model that every Hogwarts student learned, but on exchange, give and receive, sacrifice and return, the oldest magical transaction in the world, older than wands, older than incantations, older than the schools and the ministries and the institutions that had organized magic into something teachable and controllable. The book called it Covenant magic. The covenant was simple in principle and devastating in practice. The caster made a binding promise, a covenant, backed by something genuine. Not words, not intent, something real. An emotion freely offered, a memory willingly surrendered, a year of life consciously given. The offering fueled the covenant, and the magic that the covenant produced was proportional to the genuineness of the offering, not to the skill of the caster or the power of the wand. A wizard with enormous magical power and no genuine emotion could produce nothing through covenant magic. A witch with modest power and genuine love could produce enchantments that would outlast civilizations. Snape read that passage 7 times. Then he set the book down and sat in the attic of his dead father's house and stared at the wall for approximately 40 minutes, because he knew what covenant magic was. He had seen it. He had seen it once, 16 years ago, in a house in Godric's Hollow, in the green light and the screaming and the aftermath, in the impossible protection that a mother's death had placed on a child's skin. Lily's sacrifice had been covenant magic. Lily, dying for her son, had performed the oldest magic in the world, and the performing had produced a protection so powerful that Voldemort's killing curse had rebounded, and the rebounding had destroyed Voldemort's body, and the protection had persisted for 16 years in Harry Potter's blood, a living enchantment powered by a dead woman's love. Lily had not known what she was doing. Lily had not read the book. Lily had performed covenant magic instinctively, the way a mother threw herself in front of a car to save a child, the instinct older than knowledge, older than magic, older than language. The instinct was the magic. The love was the fuel. The sacrifice was the covenant. And the covenant had held. Snape took the book to Hogwarts. He took it in September, in his luggage, wrapped in the same cloth his mother had wrapped it in, and he placed it in his private quarters behind 3 layers of protective enchantment and a Fidelius charm whose secret he kept himself. He told no one. He told no one because the book was dangerous, not in the way that dark arts books were dangerous, with their curses and their corruptions and their seductive promises of power. The book was dangerous because the book was true. And the truth it contained was the truth that the entire structure of modern magical classification, the neat division of magic into light and dark that the Ministry enforced and Hogwarts taught, was a lie. There was no light and dark. There was magic. And magic was old, and the old magic did not recognize the categories that humans had imposed on it. The old magic recognized only the covenant. What are you willing to give? And what do you receive in return? The categories had been imposed for control. The book described this explicitly in a passage that Snape translated in October. Sitting in his dungeon office with the fire burning low and the first autumn rain tapping against the high windows, the schools and the courts divided the ancient practice into the permitted and the forbidden, calling one light and the other dark, as a farmer divides a field with a fence. The fence does not change the soil. The soil on both sides grows the same crops. The fence exists for the farmer's convenience, not for the soil's benefit. The analogy was agricultural, which was appropriate for a text written in an age when magic and farming were intertwined. The meaning was clear. The classification of magic into light and dark was administrative, not fundamental. The classification served the institutions that enforced it, not the magic itself. Snape understood institutions. Snape had spent his adult life serving 2 institutions, Hogwarts and the Death Eaters, and the serving had taught him that institutions existed to concentrate power, and that the concentration of power required the control of knowledge. The Ministry controlled magical knowledge by classifying it. The classification determined what was taught, what was practiced, what was legal. The classification was the control. Covenant magic had been classified as dark and suppressed, not because covenant magic was evil, but because covenant magic was uncontrollable. The magic responded to the caster's emotional truth, not to the caster's institutional authority. A Ministry official with no genuine feeling could not use covenant magic. A child with genuine love could use it instinctively. The magic was democratic in a way that institutions could not tolerate, because democratic magic undermined institutional power. The suppression had been thorough, the books had been confiscated, the practitioners had been persecuted, the knowledge had been driven underground, into families like the princes, who had kept the old texts in trunks in attics and passed the old language down through stress responses and half-remembered lullabies. Snape's mother had known. Eileen Prince had carried the knowledge in her bones, in the language she spoke when she was afraid, in the book she had kept wrapped in cloth in a trunk, in an attic, in a house where the knowledge would be safe, because nobody would look for anything valuable in a house where nothing valuable had ever lived. Before the experimenting began, Snape needed to understand the book's history. The understanding required research, which required Snape to investigate his own family, which was a form of investigation he had avoided for approximately his entire life. The Prince family. Snape's maternal line. The half-blood lineage that had given Snape his mother's wand and his mother's talent for potions, and his mother's tendency to speak in a language that nobody else at Hogwarts could understand. The Prince family had been, according to the fragments Snape could piece together from public records and private correspondence found in the trunk alongside the book, a family of practitioners. Not dark wizards, not light wizards. Practitioners. The distinction was important, because the Prince family predated the light-dark classification, and the predating meant the family's magical tradition existed outside the binary, in the space before the fence was built, in the soil that grew the same crops on both sides. The correspondence was between Snape's grandmother and his great-grandmother, written in the old language, and the correspondence described the practice of covenant magic as a family tradition, handed down through the maternal line, from mother to daughter to granddaughter. The practice is dying, Snape's great-grandmother had written in a letter dated 1943. Amelia has married a wizard who considers the old ways superstition, and the superstition dismissal is the tool the ministry uses to suppress what the ministry cannot control. The book must be preserved. The book must go to someone who will understand. The book had gone to Eileen. Eileen had preserved it. Eileen had married a muggle, not a wizard who considered the old ways superstition, and the marrying of a muggle had been, in a way that Snape had never considered, a form of protection. A muggle husband would not recognise the book's significance. A muggle husband would not report the book to the ministry. A muggle husband would ignore the trunk in the attic because the trunk contained nothing that a muggle would consider valuable. Eileen had protected the knowledge by hiding it in the one place the magical world would never look. A muggle house. The protection had worked. The book had survived. In the attic, in the trunk, in the mothball's smelling cloth, through Snape's childhood and Eileen's death and Tobias's slow deterioration, until Snape found it in August and opened it, and began the process that would change the war. The family history added a dimension to the book that Snape had not initially appreciated. The book was not merely a text. The book was an inheritance. The book was the Prince family's contribution to magical knowledge, preserved through centuries of suppression, passed from mother to daughter through a line of women who understood that the knowledge was dangerous and valuable, and that the dangerous and the valuable were, in this case, the same thing. Snape was the first man in the Prince line to receive the book. The inheritance was accidental, the result of Eileen's death before she could pass the book to a daughter she never had. The accident did not diminish the inheritance. The accident merely changed the inheritor. Snape held the book and felt, for the first time, a connection to his mother's family that was not tainted by his parents' unhappy marriage or his mother's unhappy life, or the general, pervasive unhappiness that had characterized the house on Spinner's End. The connection was to the princes as practitioners, as keepers of knowledge, as a line of women who had preserved something valuable through centuries of institutional hostility. The connection was pride. Not the taught pride of the Hogwarts houses, or the inherited pride of the pure-blood families. A quieter pride. The pride of belonging to a tradition that had survived because the people in the tradition had cared enough to keep it alive. The pride was fuel. The pride was, Snape discovered when he used it in a covenant, an offering of genuine quality. The pride of inheritance, the pride of carrying forward what others had preserved, the pride of being the next link in a chain that stretched back centuries. Snape built a covenant on the book itself, a protection, an offering of family pride in exchange for the preservation of the knowledge the family had preserved. The covenant sealed the book against detection, against theft, against the institutional forces that had suppressed the knowledge for 700 years. The book was safe. The knowledge was safe. The chain continued. Snape began experimenting in November. The experiments were private, conducted in his quarters after midnight, with the book open on his desk and his wand set aside, because Covenant magic did not use wands. Covenant magic used the caster. The caster was the instrument. The caster's body, the caster's voice, the caster's emotion. The wand was irrelevant. The first experiment was small. The book described a basic covenant, the simplest form, offer a genuine memory and receive, in return, a minor protective enchantment. The exchange was proportional. A small memory produced a small protection. A large memory produced a large protection. Snape chose a memory. He chose deliberately, carefully, the way he chose potion ingredients, evaluating each option for purity and potency. He chose a memory from childhood, from before Hogwarts, from the summer when he was 9 and Lily Evans was 9 and they sat by the river in Cokeworth and Lily made a flower open and close in her hand just by wanting it to. And Snape had watched, and the watching had been the purest happiness he had ever felt. The memory was genuine. The memory was the most genuine thing Snape possessed, because everything after the memory had been contaminated by choices and consequences and the specific, corrosive regret of a man who had loved someone and lost her through his own cruelty. Snape held the memory. Not in his mind, not the way legilimency held memories, as images to be viewed and analysed. He held the memory in his body, in his chest, in the physical space where emotion lived when emotion was allowed to live there, which was a space Snape had kept locked and barricaded for approximately 20 years. He sat cross-legged on the floor of his quarters, which was not a dignified position for the Hogwarts potions master and which was the position the book specified. The book was specific about posture. The body must be low. The body must contact the earth, or the nearest equivalent to earth, which in a castle dungeon was the stone floor. And the stone floor was, the book noted, ideal, because stone held memory the way wood held moisture, and the castle's stone had been holding magical memory for 1,000 years. The position was uncomfortable. Snape's knees did not appreciate cross-legged sitting, and his back protested the absence of a chair, and the protest was distracting, which was a problem, because the covenant required focus, not the sharp, directed focus of occlumency, but a different kind. An open focus, a state of receptivity that was closer to meditation than to concentration. Snape had never meditated. Snape had practiced occlumency, which was the opposite of meditation, the construction of walls rather than the lowering of them. The Covenant required the lowering. The Covenant required Snape to open the internal architecture that he had spent 20 years sealing, to lower the occlumency barriers that protected his mind, to become, for the duration of the offering, emotionally undefended. The exposure was terrifying. It felt like stripping armor before a battle, like voluntarily exposing the vulnerable parts. Snape's entire survival strategy, the strategy that had kept him alive as a double agent for 13 years, was based on the maintenance of mental barriers. The Covenant required him to remove them. He removed them. Slowly, partially, enough to hold the memory of Lily at 9, the memory of the river, the memory of the flower opening and closing in her hand. The memory arrived not as an image, but as a sensation, the warmth of a July afternoon, the smell of the river, the specific quality of Lily's concentration when she was doing something magical, the way her freckles scrunched when she focused. The warmth was physical. The warmth was in Snape's chest, in the space behind his sternum, the space where the occlumency barriers had kept the warmth contained for 2 decades. The warmth expanded when the barriers lowered, filling the chest, reaching the throat, the arms, the fingers. The fingers tingled. The tingling meant the Covenant was forming, the magic responding to the genuine offering. He spoke the Covenant. The words were in the old language, the language his mother had spoken when she was afraid, and the words meant, I offer this freely. I give what is genuine. I ask in return what the giving earns. The room changed. The change was not dramatic. The change was not a flash of light or a surge of power, or any of the theatrical manifestations that modern magic produced. The change was quiet. The air around Snape thickened, as though the atmosphere had become denser, more present, more aware. The fire in the grate burned differently, the flames moving with a purpose that fire did not normally possess. The shadows on the walls shifted, not randomly, but responsively, as though the shadows were listening. Snape felt the memory leave. Not disappear, not the way obliviation removed memories, leaving a blank space. The memory left the way a bird left a branch, still visible but no longer perched, still his but no longer held. The memory was now part of the Covenant. The memory was the fuel. In return, Snape received a protection. A small protection, proportional to the small memory. The protection was a ward placed on his quarters that would alert him if anyone approached with hostile intent. The ward was invisible, undetectable by standard magical means, and permanent. The ward would persist as long as the memory fueled it, which was, the book suggested, indefinitely. Snape tested the ward. He cast a detection charm on his door. Nothing. He cast Specialis Revelio. Nothing. He cast Hominum Revelio, which detected hidden magical presences. Nothing. The ward was there, active, functional, and completely invisible to every diagnostic spell Snape knew. The invisibility was the revelation. Modern magic was detectable because modern magic operated through known channels, through wand signatures and incantation residue and the specific magical fingerprints that every spell left. Covenant magic operated through none of those channels. Covenant magic operated through the Covenant itself, through the exchange, through the bond between offering and return. The bond was personal, internal, and invisible to external observation. Voldemort could not detect it. The Ministry could not detect it. Dumbledore, with all his power and all his perception, could not detect it unless Snape told him it was there. Snape sat in his warded quarters and considered the implications. The implications were enormous. The implications were strategic, tactical, personal. The implications changed the war. Snape could protect people without anyone knowing the protection existed. Snape could create enchantments that Voldemort could not detect or counter. Snape could, if the book's descriptions of larger covenants were accurate, produce effects that rivaled the most powerful known magic, including the kind of magic that had protected Harry Potter. The cost was emotion. The cost was always emotion. Every covenant required a genuine offering, and the offering had to be real, had to come from a place of authentic feeling, or the covenant would not form. A covenant made from false emotion, from performed feeling, from the kind of calculated sentiment that Snape had spent his career producing for two different masters, would produce nothing. The magic required truth. And truth was the thing Severus Snape had spent his entire adult life avoiding. The irony was precise. The most powerful magic Snape had ever encountered required the one thing Snape was least willing to provide. The man who had built walls around his heart, who had suppressed emotion with occlumency and sarcasm, and the relentless maintenance of a persona designed to prevent anyone from seeing the person underneath. That man had found a form of magic that could only be accessed by tearing down the walls. Snape did not tear down the walls. Snape, being Snape, found a door. The door was Lily. Lily was the one genuine thing. Lily was the one emotion that Snape had never successfully suppressed, despite 20 years of trying. The love for Lily was the crack in every wall, the leak in every dam, the one feeling that persisted regardless of occlumency and self-control, and the desperate ongoing project of not feeling that defined Snape's inner life. The love was genuine. The love was, in fact, the most genuine thing about Snape, the one quality that Dumbledore relied on, the one quality that Voldemort could not detect, the one quality that made Snape's double agency possible. The love for Lily was the fuel for the Covenants. Snape understood this with the cold clarity that was his particular gift, the ability to see a situation clearly, including the parts that were personally devastating. His love for Lily, the love that had ruined his life and defined his service, and that he carried the way a wounded soldier carried a bullet that the surgeons could not remove. That love was not just emotion. That love was magical power. That love was the fuel source for the most powerful magic he had ever encountered. The power was in the wound. The wound was the power. Snape began building covenants in December. Each covenant required a memory, a genuine offering from the well of Lily-related emotion that Snape had spent 20 years trying to seal, and that now, for the first time, had a purpose beyond grief. He built a protection on Harry Potter's dormitory. He chose a memory of Lily laughing. Lily at 15, laughing at something Snape had said. The specific quality of the laugh that was generous and warm and directed at him, and the offering of that memory produced a ward on the Gryffindor third-year boys' dormitory that would alert Snape to any magical threat directed at Harry within the room. He built a protection on Dumbledore's office. He chose a memory of Lily's hands working a potions assignment in 6th year, the fingers stained with ingredients, the precision of the movements, the beauty of competence. The offering produced a ward on Dumbledore's office that would detect any attempt to tamper with the office's existing protections. He built protections, ward after ward, covenant after covenant, memory after memory. Each covenant cost him. Not in the way that dark magic cost, through corruption and degradation and the slow erosion of the soul. The covenants cost him memories. Not the memories themselves, which remained accessible, but the emotional charge of the memories. The specific warmth that the memories carried. After a memory was offered, Snape could still recall the event, but the recall was clinical rather than emotional. The difference between reading about a sunset and watching one. The cost was real. By January, Snape had offered 17 memories of Lily, and the offering had produced 17 covenants, and the covenants were powerful and undetectable and strategically invaluable. And Snape could still remember every moment he had offered, but the memories felt cold now, and the coldness was the price. He was spending Lily. He was spending the emotional currency of his love for a dead woman, converting grief into protection, converting longing into enchantment. Spending was necessary, but it was also, he recognized, a form of loss. Every memory offered was a memory drained of its warmth. Every covenant was a piece of his emotional life surrendered in exchange for magical effect. The question was whether the spending would leave him empty. The question was whether the well of Lily-related emotion had a bottom, and if so, what happened when he reached it? Snape did not know the answer. Snape continued spending. Dumbledore found out in February. Not because Snape told him, because Dumbledore walked into his own office and felt the Covenant ward, which Snape had not anticipated, because the ward was supposed to be undetectable. The ward was undetectable to magical detection. The ward was not undetectable to Dumbledore, because Dumbledore was not using magical detection. Dumbledore was using the other thing. The Dumbledore thing, the particular quality of perception that went beyond magical sensitivity into something that Snape had never been able to categorize, and that Dumbledore himself described, unhelpfully, as paying attention. Severus, Dumbledore said, at dinner, sitting beside Snape at the staff table while the Great Hall churned with the noise of several hundred students eating. There is something new in my office. I couldn't say, Headmaster. You could say. You are choosing not to say, which is different. I have no knowledge of anything new in your office. The knowledge is precisely what you have. You have placed a covenant ward on my office door. Snape's fork stopped moving. The pause was brief, less than a second, but Dumbledore saw it because Dumbledore saw everything. I am unfamiliar with the term covenant ward, Snape said. You are unfamiliar with the term because the term has not been used in common magical practice for approximately 700 years. The last known practitioners of covenant magic were the hedge witches of the Welsh Marches, who were persecuted by the Wizards' Council in the 13th century. The knowledge was believed lost. If the knowledge was believed lost, then the knowledge is lost, and any ward resembling a covenant ward is coincidental. Severus, I can feel it. The ward carries the emotional signature of the offering. The offering involved a memory of someone you loved. The ward is powered by the emotional residue of genuine affection, which is, in my experience, the rarest magical fuel in existence and one that I have encountered precisely once before. Once before. In Godric's Hollow. In the protection on Harry Potter. The Great Hall continued around them. Students ate. Professors talked. The enchanted ceiling showed a February sky, grey and heavy with the promise of snow. You know what covenant magic is, Snape said. I know what covenant magic is. I have known since Godric's Hollow. I recognised Lily's protection as covenant magic, and I chose not to investigate further because the investigation would have required me to understand the mechanism, and understanding the mechanism would have required me to find the texts. And finding the texts would have been dangerous. Dangerous because the texts are classified as dark. Dangerous because the texts would have tempted me. The temptation of covenant magic is the temptation of genuine power at genuine cost, and I have spent my life resisting temptation. I chose to leave the texts undiscovered. And now they are discovered. And now they are discovered, and you are using them, and the using is producing effects that I can feel but cannot counter, and that Voldemort, when he returns, will not be able to detect. When he returns. Voldemort will return. The question has never been whether but when. And when he returns, Severus, the covenants you are building will be the one advantage we possess that he cannot anticipate. Dumbledore looked at Snape. The gaze was pure Dumbledore, the blue-eyed, bespectacled, penetrating gaze that saw through pretense the way light saw through glass. How many covenants have you built? Dumbledore asked. 17, and the cost? Memories of Lily. The emotional charge of the memories. The warmth. You are spending Lily. I am investing Lily. The distinction is relevant. The distinction is financial. The cost is personal. The cost has always been personal. This is merely a different form of payment. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. The snow had begun falling outside, fat flakes drifting past the enchanted ceiling, and the hall was warm, and the students were laughing, and the world was, for the moment, at peace. Severus, the covenant demands genuine emotion. The covenants you have built are powered by your love for Lily. The love is real. The covenants are powerful, but the love is finite, and the spending is reducing it, and I am concerned about what happens when the well runs dry. The well will not run dry. You are certain? I have loved Lily Evans for 23 years. The love has survived her death, my betrayal, 2 decades of grief, and the ongoing experience of teaching her son, who has her eyes and his father's face and the specific infuriating quality of looking at me as though I am the villain of his story. The love has survived everything. The love will not run dry. And if it does, then I will find another source. Another source of genuine emotion? Severus, you have spent 20 years ensuring that Lily is your only source. You have built walls around every other emotional possibility. If Lily runs dry, there is nothing behind the walls. Then I will build more covenants before it runs dry. Or you could consider the possibility that there are emotions other than grief that can fuel the covenants, such as the emotion you are currently experiencing, which is defensiveness, and which is, if I am not mistaken, powered by the fear that I am right. Snape looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore looked at Snape. Between them was 20 years of shared secrets and mutual manipulation, and the complicated, strained, essential relationship of two men who trusted each other with their lives, but not with their feelings. I will continue building covenants, Snape said. I will continue using memories of Lily. The cost is mine to manage. The benefit is the wars to receive. The cost is yours, Dumbledore agreed. But Severus, I would ask you to consider something. Consider what? That Lily's sacrifice was not the only form of covenant magic. Lily's sacrifice was love expressed as death. The covenants you are building are love expressed as memory. But covenant magic responds to any genuine emotion, not only love, not only grief. The magic responds to truth. And there are truths available to you that you have not yet considered, such as the truth that you care about the students you teach. Not all of them. Not equally, but some of them. Severus, you care about, and the caring is genuine, and the genuineness is fuel. Snape said nothing. Snape said nothing because Dumbledore had just described something that Snape had spent 20 years denying, which was that the teaching mattered, that the students mattered, that the daily, unglamorous, frequently infuriating work of educating children in a dungeon classroom had produced, against Snape's will and despite his best efforts, genuine emotional investment. The investment was there. The investment was the reason Snape could not walk away from Hogwarts, could not abandon the school even when the school's headmaster asked him to participate in plans that required the destruction of Snape's reputation and possibly Snape's life. The investment was the anchor. The investment was another source. Snape did not acknowledge the investment. Snape finished his dinner and went to his quarters and sat in the warded room and thought about what Dumbledore had said, and the thinking lasted most of the night. And the night was long, and the discomfort was real in the way that truths were uncomfortable when they arrived uninvited. Third year also brought Remus Lupin back to Hogwarts, and Lupin brought an unexpected test of Snape's covenant practice. Snape's hatred of Lupin was genuine. The hatred was not the performative dislike of the persona, but the real, specific, earned hostility of a man who had been nearly killed by a werewolf at 16 because of a prank that Lupin had, at minimum, failed to prevent, and who had spent 20 years carrying the memory of the tunnel and the teeth and the specific animal terror of being hunted by something that was not entirely human. The hatred was genuine. The hatred was also, Snape discovered when he examined it through the covenant framework, limiting. Genuine hatred was not useful as covenant fuel. Not because hatred was morally wrong. The covenants made no moral judgments, but because hatred was inherently self-referential. Hatred was about the hater. Hatred was about Snape's injury, Snape's fear, Snape's resentment. The self-referential quality diminished the offering's potency, the way self-interest diminished any offering. The discovery was instructive. Not all genuine emotions were equally potent. Genuine selfless emotions were more potent than genuine selfish ones. Love for another person was more potent than love for oneself. Anger on behalf of a child was more potent than anger on one's own behalf. And hatred, however genuine, was the least potent fuel of all, because hatred was the most self-referential emotion, the emotion most deeply embedded in the hater's own experience, the emotion least capable of transcending the self. Snape filed this observation alongside the Voldemort observation and the Lily observation and the teaching observation, and the filing created a picture, a comprehensive understanding of covenant magic's emotional economy. The economy was. Selflessness was currency. The more selfless the emotion, the more powerful the covenant. The scale ran from selfless love at the top to selfish hatred at the bottom, with the full spectrum of genuine emotion arranged between them. And the arrangement was not moral, but mechanical. The way gravity was not moral, but mechanical. The way water flowed downhill, not because downhill was morally correct, but because flowing was simply the nature of the thing. The economy explained Lily. Lily's sacrifice was the most selfless act imaginable, a mother dying for her child, the self entirely consumed in the service of the other. The selflessness was total. The potency was total. The protection was the most powerful covenant enchantment in magical history because the act was the most selfless in magical history. The economy also explained Voldemort's inability to use the magic. Voldemort was entirely self-referential. Voldemort's emotions, to the extent that Voldemort had emotions, were entirely about Voldemort. Voldemort's power, Voldemort's immortality, Voldemort's dominion. The self-reference was total. The covenant potency was therefore 0. Voldemort could not use covenant magic because Voldemort could not produce the selfless emotion that the magic required. The void was not the absence of emotion. The void was the absence of selfless emotion. The distinction was crucial because the distinction meant that Voldemort was not emotionless, but was, rather, trapped in a closed circuit of self-reference that prevented any emotional energy from flowing outward, the way a short circuit prevented electricity from reaching the device it was meant to power. Snape understood short circuits. Snape had been living in one for 20 years. The occlumency barriers, the persona, the suppression, the 20-year project of not feeling had created a closed circuit in Snape's emotional life. A circuit that kept the emotional energy circulating internally without ever reaching the outside. The Covenants had opened the circuit. The Covenants had created pathways for the emotional energy to flow outward, from Snape to the castle, from feeling to protection, from internal experience to external effect. Opening was the practice. The practice was the life. The rest of third year passed with Snape building covenants in secret and teaching potions in public and maintaining the double life that had been his primary occupation since he was 21, except that the double life now had a third layer, which was the covenants, which were invisible to both masters and which belonged to neither. The covenants belonged to Snape. The covenants were the first thing in 20 years that belonged exclusively to Snape, that served neither Dumbledore's strategy nor Voldemort's ambition, but Snape's own judgment about what needed protecting and how. The sense of ownership was unfamiliar. Snape was not accustomed to owning things that mattered. By June, he had built 31 covenants. Protections on Harry's dormitory, Dumbledore's office, the Gryffindor common room, the hospital wing, the Great Hall, the entrance to the castle, and a dozen other locations that Snape's tactical assessment identified as vulnerable. Each covenant was invisible, undetectable, powered by a memory of Lily, and each covenant reduced the emotional charge of the memory that fueled it by a degree that Snape measured not in numbers, but in the quality of his sleep, which was deteriorating, not because of nightmares, but because of the absence of the dreams, the Lily dreams, the dreams that had been his only comfort for 16 years and that were becoming, as the covenants consumed their fuel, less vivid, less warm, less present. He was losing Lily. Not the memory of Lily, which remained intact, but the feeling of Lily, the specific emotional quality that distinguished a living memory from a historical fact. The memories were becoming facts. The facts were useful, but cold. The coldness was the cost, and Snape paid it. Fourth year brought Voldemort's return, and the return brought the first strategic deployment of Covenant magic in the war. Snape felt the dark mark burn on the night of the third task. He felt the summoning, the pull in his forearm, the call that meant the wraith had found a body and the body had found a wand, and the war was beginning again. He went to the graveyard. He arrived late, deliberately, because arriving late was the cover, and the cover required the appearance of reluctant obedience. In the graveyard, Snape saw Voldemort's new body. The body was pale, serpentine, wrong in the way that things were wrong when they were assembled from instructions that had been corrupted by decades of misuse. The body worked. The body was functional. The body was also, Snape noticed with the clinical precision that was his professional gift, magically unstable, because the body had been constructed through a ritual that was, at its core, a perversion of Covenant magic. The ritual had used Harry's blood. The blood was Covenant protected, carrying the residue of Lily's sacrifice. The ritual had incorporated the protection into Voldemort's new body, which meant that Voldemort's new body contained, unknowingly, a fragment of Covenant magic that Voldemort could not detect and did not understand. Snape understood it. Snape, who had spent 9 months studying the book, who had built 31 covenants, who had learned to read the emotional signatures of Covenant enchantments the way a musician reads sheet music, Snape could see the Covenant residue in Voldemort's body the way he could see the flaw in a badly brewed potion. The residue was Lily's. The residue was the protection, and the protection, incorporated into Voldemort's body, was doing something that Voldemort could not feel and that Snape could barely believe. The protection was weakening Voldemort from within. Slowly, incrementally, the Covenant enchantment, powered by love, was corroding the vessel that contained no love, the way salt corroded iron, gradually, invisibly, from the inside. Snape filed this observation in the mental archive that occlumency protected. But the observation continued to develop during the following weeks, as Snape attended further meetings and sat in further proximity to the body that Voldemort now inhabited. The body was wrong. Not merely in appearance, which was serpentine and uncanny and designed to inspire fear. The body was wrong in the way that a potion was wrong when a crucial ingredient was missing. The body functioned the way a potion without one ingredient might still produce an effect, but the effect was diminished, unstable, prone to failure in ways that the complete version would not be. The missing ingredient was Lily's. The Covenant protection in Harry's blood, incorporated into Voldemort's body through the resurrection ritual, was not merely a residue. The protection was an active enchantment, working against the body from within. Lily's love, embedded in the blood, was corroding the vessel that had been built to contain a loveless soul. Snape could feel the corrosion during meetings. The corrosion manifested as a faint wrongness in Voldemort's magical signature, a slight instability that Snape perceived through the Covenant-enhanced perception the way a musician perceived a note played slightly flat. The wrongness was small. The wrongness was growing. The Dark Lord's body is unstable, Snape told Dumbledore, in a coded communication sent through a Covenant-protected channel, a channel that existed outside both Owlpost and Patronus messaging, and that was invisible to every detection method either side possessed. The instability is gradual and cumulative. The cause is Lily's protection, which is working against the body from inside. The protection is not merely defensive. The protection is actively hostile. Actively hostile, Dumbledore repeated in his return communication. You believe Lily's sacrifice is attacking Voldemort from within? Not attacking, corroding. The distinction matters. An attack would be detectable. The corrosion is not. The corrosion is the slow, invisible weakening of a vessel that contains an element fundamentally incompatible with its contents. Love in a loveless vessel. The incompatibility is eroding the vessel. How long until the erosion produces failure? Unknown, years, possibly, decades, possibly. The erosion is slow because the love residue is small relative to the vessel's magical power, but the erosion is constant, and the constancy is the weapon. You are describing Lily's sacrifice as a slow, acting poison. I am describing Lily's sacrifice as a covenant operating as designed. The covenant's purpose was to protect Harry. The protection manifests defensively through Harry's blood, but the protection also manifests offensively through any vessel that incorporates Harry's blood. Voldemort incorporated Harry's blood into his body. The body now contains a covenant enchantment that is working continuously and invisibly against its host. Voldemort is being destroyed by the thing he stole. Voldemort is being destroyed by the love he cannot feel. The destruction is poetic. The poetry does not diminish the strategy. The strategy being, wait. The strategy being, supplement the waiting with active measures. The Horcrux destruction through counter-covenants. The healing covenant for Harry's scar. The combination of Lily's internal corrosion and our external dismantling. The combination is a pincer movement. The combination is covenant magic operating from both directions simultaneously, from inside Voldemort through Lily's stolen protection, from outside through my counter-covenants, the corrupted covenants of the Horcruxes dissolved by genuine offerings, the genuine offerings meeting Lily's genuine protection, the genuine surrounding the corrupted. The surrounding is the ending. Dumbledore was quiet. The communication channel hummed with the Covenant's warm energy, the channel itself a testament to the magic they were discussing. Severus, Dumbledore said, I believe this may work. It will work because the mechanism is sound. The mechanism is, genuine emotion defeats corrupted emotion. Love defeats theft. The freely given defeats the forcibly taken. The mechanism is not new. The mechanism is the oldest magic in the world. The mechanism is what Lily used. I am merely using it deliberately rather than instinctively. Deliberately. With knowledge, with planning. With knowledge and planning and the specific, reluctant, deeply uncomfortable willingness to feel things that I have spent 20 years not feeling. The willingness is the courage, Severus. The willingness is the necessity. Do not mistake necessity for virtue. I will mistake it for whatever I choose. The result is the same. Snape filed it in the place where he kept the observations that were too important and too dangerous to share with anyone, the mental archive that occlumency protected and that contained, alongside 20 years of intelligence, the growing understanding that Covenant magic might be the key to destroying Voldemort. Not the Horcruxes. Not the Elder Wand. Not the prophecy. The Covenants. The Death Eater meetings resumed after the graveyard. Snape attended. Snape knelt. Snape wore the mask and the robes and performed the obeisance that Voldemort required and that Snape provided with the specific, precise, emotionally absent competence that had made him Voldemort's most trusted spy for 13 years. The meetings were held at Malfoy Manor, in the drawing room, around a long table where the Death Eaters sat in order of Voldemort's favour. Snape sat near the head of the table, which was a position of trust, and the trust was based on the persona, and the persona was the mask, and the mask was the performance, and the performance was flawless, because the flawlessness was what kept Snape alive. But the performance was different now. The performance was different because Snape could see things. The Covenants had changed Snape's perception. The way learning a language changed your hearing. The way learning to paint changed your seeing. The Covenants had taught Snape to perceive emotional authenticity, to feel the genuine and the false in the people around him, and the perception was immediate. Snape could feel the Death Eaters, not their thoughts, which remained private, their emotions, their genuine emotional states, beneath the performances they maintained for Voldemort and for each other. Bellatrix Lestrange was genuinely devoted. The devotion was real, a worship that bordered on the religious, a surrender of self so complete that Bellatrix had no emotional life independent of Voldemort's approval. The devotion was terrifying because the devotion was authentic. An authentic devotion to a Dark Lord was more dangerous than any amount of calculated self-interest. Lucius Malfoy was afraid. Beneath the aristocratic composure, beneath the drawl and the cane and the hair, Lucius Malfoy was afraid of Voldemort the way a man was afraid of an avalanche. Totally, physically, without the ability to influence the outcome. The fear was genuine. The fear made Lucius predictable. Draco, when Draco attended the meetings in 6th year, was something else entirely. Draco's emotional state was a chaos of fear and resentment and the specific heartbreaking confusion of a 16-year-old who had been raised to admire the thing that was now demanding his service, and who was discovering, too late, that admiration and obedience were not the same thing, and that the thing he admired was willing to kill him if he failed. Voldemort himself was, to Snape's Covenant-enhanced perception, a void. Not evil. Not cruel. A void. An absence where genuine emotion should have been. The emotional equivalent of a room with no furniture. The walls standing but the room empty. Voldemort could not feel. Voldemort had destroyed his capacity for genuine emotion through 50 years of soul-splitting and murder and the systematic elimination of every quality that made a person a person. The void was the weakness. The void was the reason Voldemort could not use Covenant magic, could not detect Covenant magic, could not understand the mechanism by which Lily's sacrifice had protected Harry and by which Snape's covenants were protecting the castle. The void was total. The void was Voldemort's defining characteristic, more than the power, more than the intelligence, more than the cruelty. The cruelty was a symptom of the void. The void came first. Everything else followed. Snape sat at the table and felt the void and understood, with the clarity that Covenant magic provided, that the war was not between good and evil. The war was between genuine and empty. Between people who felt and a man who could not. Between the covenants, which required genuine emotion, and the Horcruxes, which required the destruction of genuine emotion. The war was about whether feeling mattered. The covenants said, feeling is the source of the greatest magic. The Horcruxes said, feeling is the weakness to be eliminated. The war would be decided by which interpretation prevailed. Snape knelt before the void and felt the genuine emotions of the Death Eaters around him and built, in his mind, the map of the war's emotional geography, and the map was as useful as any intelligence he had gathered in 13 years of spying, because the map showed where the weaknesses were, and the weaknesses were always emotional, and the emotions were always genuine. The summer after 4th year was spent in preparation. Snape attended Death Eater meetings. Snape reported to Dumbledore. Snape built covenants. The covenants expanded. Snape placed them on Order headquarters at Grimmauld Place, layering them beneath the Fidelius charm that already protected the house. The Fidelius was powerful but detectable, a known enchantment with known vulnerabilities. The covenants were unknown. The covenants added a layer of protection that operated beneath the Fidelius, invisible even to Dumbledore's Fidelius charm, a protection within a protection, a secret inside a secret. The offering for the Grimmauld Place covenants was not Lily. This time, the offering was different. The difference was the result of Dumbledore's observation about other sources of genuine emotion, which Snape had spent the summer reluctantly considering. He offered a teaching memory. Specifically, a memory of a second-year Hufflepuff named Rosalind Templeton, who had been catastrophically bad at potions, who had melted 3 cauldrons in 2 weeks, who had produced a swelling solution that had caused her own ears to inflate to the size of dinner plates, and who had, After 8 weeks of patient, grudging, sarcastic instruction from Snape, produced a shrinking solution that was not merely acceptable, but excellent. The excellence had surprised Rosalind. The excellence had also, although Snape would never have admitted this to any living person, surprised Snape. The surprise had been followed by something that Snape had immediately suppressed and that had persisted despite the suppression. A feeling that was warm and uncomfortable and that bore a structural resemblance to pride. Pride in a student. Pride in the work of teaching. Pride in the transformation of catastrophic incompetence into genuine skill through sustained effort and expert guidance. The pride was genuine. The pride was, Snape discovered when he offered it to the Covenant, exactly as potent as the Lily memories. The Covenant accepted the pride the way the Covenants accepted all genuine emotion, completely and without judgment, and the Grimmauld Place protection strengthened, and the result was real, proof that Dumbledore had been right. There were other sources. The love for Lily was not the only fuel. The well had tributaries. The tributaries were the teaching, the grudging, denied, constantly suppressed investment in the work of educating children who were frequently ungrateful and occasionally dangerous, and always the point. The children were the point. Snape had known this in the way that you knew things you refused to acknowledge for 20 years. The children were the reason he stayed at Hogwarts. Not Dumbledore's orders, not the war, not the guilt over Lily. The children. The Rosalinds and the Longbottoms and the 1,000 other students who had passed through his classroom and who had learned. Despite Snape's best efforts to make the learning unpleasant, the subtle science and exact art of potion making. Learning was the point. It was genuine. It was fuel. Snape began building covenants fueled by teaching memories. The covenants were powerful because the memories were abundant. 20 years of daily emotional investment producing a reservoir of genuine feeling that Snape had not recognized as feeling because the care was wrapped in sarcasm and disdain, and the specific Snape camouflage that prevented anyone, including Snape, from seeing the care underneath. The care was there. The care had always been there. The Covenants proved it, because the Covenants could not be fueled by pretense, and the Covenants accepted the teaching memories with the same potency as the Lily memories, which meant the care was real, which meant Snape cared about his students, which was the most personally devastating discovery Snape had made since finding the book. He told nobody. He told nobody because the discovery was humiliating in the specific way that truths about oneself were humiliating when they contradicted the narrative one had constructed. Snape's narrative was, I am here because of Lily. I teach because of Dumbledore. I endure the children because the enduring is required. The truth was, I am here because the teaching matters. I teach because the students matter. I endure the children because I love them in the angry, frustrated, sarcastic, deeply buried way that I love everything, which is badly and with great difficulty, and with results that are, when I allow myself to look at them honestly, excellent. Snape did not allow himself to look honestly. Snape built covenants and told himself that the work was strategic and the strategy was the point. The strategy was the point. The strategy was also a convenient excuse for the care that produced it. Snape was aware of the convenience. Snape chose not to examine the convenience too closely, because examining it would require acknowledging its source, and acknowledging the source would require feeling the feeling, and the emotion was the thing Snape was simultaneously experiencing and refusing to admit he was doing, which was, Snape reflected, a fairly accurate description of his entire emotional life. Fifth year brought two intersecting challenges, Dolores Umbridge and the occlumency lessons with Harry Potter, and the intersection was the moment when Snape's Covenant knowledge changed his relationship with Harry. The occlumency lessons were Dumbledore's order. Voldemort was sending visions through the connection to Harry's scar, and the visions needed to be blocked. And the blocking required occlumency, and the teaching required Snape, because Snape was the most skilled occlumens at Hogwarts. Snape had taught occlumency before to himself, and the self-teaching had been brutal and effective, and had produced the mental architecture that allowed Snape to lie to Voldemort's face without detection. Snape's occlumency was the foundation of the double agency. The occlumency was also, Snape now understood, the prison. The occlumency had imprisoned Snape's emotions. The occlumency barriers that protected Snape's mind from legitimacy also prevented Snape from accessing his own emotional life, the way a firewall that protected a house from intruders also prevented the residents from leaving. The barriers worked in both directions. The barriers kept Voldemort out and kept Snape in. The Covenant magic required the barriers to come down. The occlumency and the Covenant magic were fundamentally incompatible, the occlumency suppressing the genuine emotion that the Covenant magic required. Snape had managed this incompatibility by lowering the barriers selectively during Covenant construction and rebuilding them afterward. The selective lowering was exhausting and imprecise and produced, in Snape's mental architecture, a series of small doors in what had previously been solid walls. The doors were a vulnerability. The doors were also a capability. The doors allowed Snape to access genuine emotion on demand, opening a door, feeling the emotion, offering the emotion to a Covenant, and closing the door again. The opening and closing was a skill that Snape had developed over 2 years, and the skill was, he realised during the occlumency lessons, exactly what Harry needed. Harry did not need to build walls. Harry needed to build doors. The distinction was crucial. Dumbledore's instruction to Snape was, teach Harry to block Voldemort. Snape's Covenant-informed understanding was, teach Harry to control the connection, not to block it. Blocking was crude. Blocking prevented Voldemort's intrusion, but also prevented Harry from using the connection, and the connection, Snape now understood, was a Covenant channel, a pathway created by the Horcrux's corrupted Covenant, a pathway that could be controlled rather than blocked. Clear your mind, Snape said during the first lesson, because the instruction was standard and the standard was expected. Harry could not clear his mind. Harry was 15, emotional, angry, and carrying the specific burden of being Harry Potter, which was a burden that produced a constant churning emotional weather that made clearing the mind approximately as feasible as clearing the sky. You are not attempting to clear your mind, Snape said. I am attempting. You are attempting the way a person attempts to empty the ocean by throwing water at the shore. The attempt is visible, but the result is null. Then tell me what to do differently. Stop trying to empty your mind. Your mind is not a container to be emptied. Your mind is a house. The house has rooms. The rooms have doors. The lesson is not emptying the house. The lesson is learning which doors to close. Harry looked at Snape. Harry looked like a student who had expected hostility and received instruction, and the surprise was visible. Doors, Harry said. Doors. You are experiencing emotions. The emotions are legitimate. I am not asking you to stop having emotions, which would be asking you to stop being human. A request that is both futile and inappropriate. I am asking you to learn to close the doors of the rooms that contain the emotions you do not want Voldemort to access. I choose which emotions to protect. You choose which emotions to shield. The shielding is selective. The shielding protects the genuine while allowing the functional. Voldemort can sense your surface emotions, your anger, your frustration. Let him. The surface is not the vulnerability. The vulnerability is the deep emotion, the love, the fear, the care. Shield the deep. Allow the surface. The distinction is the defense. The instruction was not standard occlumency. The instruction was covenant-informed occlumency, the hybrid technique that Snape had developed through 2 years of managing the incompatibility between mental barriers and emotional access. The technique was more effective than standard occlumency because the technique did not require the suppression of all emotion, only the shielding of specific emotions, and the specificity was achievable in a way that total suppression was not. Harry learned. Slowly, badly, with the particular Harry Potter quality of making progress through stubbornness rather than skill. But the progress was real, and the progress was based on Snape's genuine instruction, and the genuineness was different from anything Snape had previously offered Harry. The lessons ended badly, as they had always been going to end badly, because Snape's worst memory was in the pensieve, and Harry saw it, and the seeing produced a confrontation that Snape used as an excuse to end the lessons. But the instruction had been given, and the doors had been taught, and Harry's occlumency, while imperfect, was based on a framework that worked. And the framework was Snape's gift, and the gift was genuine. Snape had taught Harry something real. Snape had taught Harry using knowledge from the Covenant book, knowledge that Snape had developed through his own practice, knowledge that was neither Dumbledore's strategy nor Voldemort's interest but Snape's own. And the lesson was the second time in Snape's life that the Covenant knowledge had produced a direct benefit for Harry Potter. The first time was the dormitory wards. The second time was the doors. Both were protections. Both were invisible. Both were genuine. 5th year brought Umbridge, and Umbridge brought a test that Snape had not anticipated. Could Covenant magic protect against institutional evil? The answer was, partially, and the partiality was instructive. Snape placed a Covenant on the defense against the dark arts classroom. He offered a memory from his own student years, a memory of the first time he had successfully cast a shield charm. At 14, alone in an empty classroom, practicing because James Potter and his friends had spent the afternoon hexing him, and the hexing had produced, alongside the bruises and the humiliation, a determination to learn every defensive spell in the library. The determination was genuine. The memory was genuine. The Covenant formed. The Covenant protected against magical threats directed at students in the classroom. The protection was designed to alert Snape if any student was subjected to harmful magic during a lesson. The Covenant activated during Umbridge's first use of the blood quill. Snape felt it. In his quarters, in the dungeons, Snape felt the Covenant trigger, the alert arriving not as a sound or a visual cue, but as a sensation, a tightening in his chest that meant someone in the protected space is being hurt. Snape went to Dumbledore. "The blood quill," Snape said. "She is using a blood quill on students." "How do you know this?" "I know this. Severus. The how matters. The how is Covenant magic." I placed a protection on the defense classroom. The protection alerted me. Dumbledore's expression shifted, the blue eyes becoming sharper, the benevolent facade thinning to reveal the strategist underneath. "You placed a Covenant ward on Umbridge's classroom. I placed a Covenant ward on a classroom in which students were being educated. The ward does not discriminate between professors. The ward detects harm directed at students, and the ward detected the blood quill. The ward detected a dark artifact being used on a child's skin in a room I have protected. The detection was unambiguous. We cannot act on information obtained through classified magic. We can act on information obtained through any means. The source of the information does not change the content of the information. A child is being cut. If we reveal the source, we reveal the covenants. If we reveal the covenants, Voldemort learns about them. If we do not act, a child is being cut every night in a classroom I have warded. The argument was the argument that defined Snape and Dumbledore's relationship. strategy versus action, long-term versus immediate, the chess player versus the person standing in front of the board watching a pawn suffer. We will act, Dumbledore said, through conventional means. I will inform the Board of Governors. McGonagall will file a complaint. The process will be institutional. The process will be slow. The process will preserve the covenants. The process will allow a child to be cut for the duration of the process. Yes, and the preservation of the covenants will allow us to protect all students against future threats that are more dangerous than a blood quill. The calculation is monstrous. The calculation is correct. Snape looked at Dumbledore, at the man who calculated with children's pain, who weighed present suffering against future safety, who made decisions that were strategically sound and morally repugnant, and who carried the repugnance with the specific Dumbledore quality of acknowledging the wrongness while doing the wrong thing anyway because the wronger thing was worse. I will not accept the calculation, Snape said. You must. I will not accept the calculation, because the calculation treats a child's pain as a variable. Pain is not a variable. Pain is a fact. The fact is, a child is being cut. The response to the fact is, stop the cutting. And if stopping the cutting reveals the covenants, then the covenants are revealed. I will build more. Severus. I did not learn covenant magic to protect chess pieces, Albus. I learned covenant magic to protect children. If the protecting requires the revealing, I will reveal. The argument ended without resolution. The blood quill situation was addressed through conventional means, McGonagall's complaint, the board's investigation, but the addressing took weeks. And during the weeks, Snape placed an additional covenant on Umbridge's classroom. A covenant that did not merely alert, but that mitigated, reducing the blood quill's cutting to a surface scratch rather than a deep wound, the reduction invisible to Umbridge, but felt by every student who served detention from that point forward. The mitigation covenant was fueled by anger. Snape's anger at Umbridge, at the ministry, at the institutional apparatus that placed a sadist in a classroom and called it education. The anger was genuine. The anger was, Snape discovered, extraordinarily potent as covenant fuel. The anger produced a covenant that was stronger than any of the Lily memories, stronger than the teaching pride, stronger than anything Snape had offered before. Anger was fuel. Genuine anger at genuine injustice was fuel of a purity and intensity that surprised even Snape, who had been angry about many things for many years, and who had never considered the anger as anything other than a liability. The anger was not a liability. The anger was, in fact, the purest fuel Snape had discovered since beginning the practice. A specific incident in March crystallized the understanding. A first-year Muggle-born Hufflepuff named Alice Roper was caught by Umbridge reading a Muggle novel in the corridor between classes. The novel was The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett, which Alice's mother had sent from home because Alice was homesick and the book was Alice's favourite. Umbridge confiscated the book. Umbridge confiscated the book not because Muggle novels were banned, which they were not, but because Umbridge's educational decrees gave her the authority to confiscate any material she deemed inconsistent with Ministry-approved educational objectives. And Umbridge deemed a Muggle novel about a girl who found a garden to be inconsistent with the objective of training wizards. A Muggle novel, Umbridge said in the staff room, holding the confiscated book between two fingers as though it carried disease. In my corridors. In my school. The school belongs to the students, Minerva McGonagall said. The school belongs to the Ministry. Educational decree number, the school belongs to the students. Dolores, the students' property, is the students' property. The book is the students' property. The book is Muggle filth. The book is a children's novel about gardening. Snape said nothing during this exchange. Snape said nothing because Snape's cover required the appearance of alignment with Umbridge, and the appearance required silence when Umbridge exercised her authority. The silence was costly. The silence was the cost of the cover, and the cost was paid in the specific currency of watching injustice and doing nothing visible about it. Snape went to his quarters that evening. Snape sat on the floor. Snape lowered the occlumency barriers. The anger was there. The anger was vast, a reservoir of accumulated fury at the small cruelties that institutional power inflicted on people who could not fight back. The fury was not abstract. The fury was specific. Alice Roper, 11 years old, homesick, reading her favourite book, and a woman in pink taking it away because the taking away was possible, and the possibility was the power. Snape offered the anger. The Covenant accepted it. The Covenant produced a protection on the Hufflepuff first-year dormitory that was the strongest single offering Covenant Snape had ever built, a protection so potent that it would persist, undetectable, for decades. The anger was pure because the anger was selfless. The anger was not about Snape. The anger was about Alice Roper and every Alice Roper in the school. Every child who was being taught by an institution that the adults in the institution were supposed to be protecting them from. The selflessness of the anger was the purity, and the purity was the potency, and the potency was the lesson. Genuine emotion was most powerful when it was directed outward. Love for another person was more potent than love for oneself. Anger on behalf of a child was more potent than anger on one's own behalf. The magic rewarded selflessness not through moral judgment but through mechanical fact. Selfless emotion was simply more genuine than selfish emotion, because selfless emotion had been stripped of self-interest, and self-interest was the impurity that weakened the offering. Snape understood this now. That understanding was the final piece. It explained Lily's sacrifice, which had been entirely selfless, entirely directed at protecting her son, entirely free of self-interest. The selflessness was why the sacrifice had produced the most powerful known Covenant enchantment in magical history. The selflessness was the purity. The purity was the power. The secret garden was returned to Alice Roper the following week, through means that Alice could not explain and that Umbridge could not investigate. The book appeared on Alice's pillow, undamaged, with a note that said, "The garden persists." The note was unsigned. Alice kept the note. Alice kept the note for the rest of her life, in the back of the book, and the mystery persisted. The mystery of who had cared enough about a homesick 11-year-old to return a confiscated novel, and the mystery was never solved. And the not solving was appropriate, because the caring did not require recognition. The caring required only the giving. The anger was a resource. The anger was the third tributary after love and pride, and the tributary was deep and fast and showed no signs of running dry. Snape's emotional repertoire, it turned out, was larger than he had believed. The repertoire included love and grief and pride and anger, and each emotion, when genuine, when offered freely, produced Covenant magic of astonishing power. The power was not proportional to the emotion's pleasantness. The power was proportional to the emotion's authenticity. Pleasant emotions and unpleasant emotions produced equal power because the Covenants did not judge the offering. The Covenants judged only the genuineness. Snape was genuine about many things. Snape had simply never allowed the many things to be visible, because visibility meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant the possibility of being hurt. And being hurt was the thing Snape had built his entire identity around avoiding. The Covenants did not require visibility. The Covenants required only the internal experience of genuine feeling, which Snape had in abundance despite decades of pretending otherwise. Pretending was the persona. The person lived underneath. And the person it turned out, was considerably more emotionally complex than the persona had ever suggested. The Da formed in the autumn of 5th year, and the Da produced an unexpected interaction with Covenant magic. Harry Potter was teaching defense to 40 students in the Room of Requirement, and the teaching produced, in Harry, exactly the kind of genuine emotional investment that Snape recognized as Covenant compatible. Harry cared about the students. Harry cared about the teaching. Harry cared in the specific, fierce, protective way that produced, in Snape's experience, the most potent Covenant fuel. Harry was a natural Covenant practitioner. Harry did not know this. Harry did not know that the protections he was building, the confidence and the skill and the community, were generating ambient Covenant effects, the kind of effects that the book described as the echo of genuine care, producing protections that the carer does not intend and that the protected do not perceive. The Da was surrounded by Covenant echoes. The Room of Requirement, which responded to need, was amplifying the echoes, and the amplification was producing protections that Snape could feel from the dungeons, a warmth rising through the castle's foundations like heat from a fire several floors above. Potter is producing Covenant effects, Snape told Dumbledore. Harry is teaching defense. Harry is teaching defense with genuine care for his students, and the caring is producing ambient Covenant magic, and the ambient magic is strengthening the castle's protections. Harry does not know about Covenant magic. Harry does not need to know. Lily did not know. The magic responds to the emotion, not to the knowledge. Harry is producing Covenant effects because Harry cares, and the caring is genuine, and the genuineness is sufficient. Like mother, like son. The comparison is accurate and unwelcome. The comparison is accurate and inevitable, Severus. Harry is Lily's child. Lily's Covenant instinct, the ability to produce Covenant magic through genuine emotional investment, has been inherited. The inheritance is, I would suggest, the most important thing Lily left Harry. Lily left Harry her eyes. Lily left Harry her eyes and her capacity for love and the specific magical inheritance that makes love operationally effective. The eyes are cosmetic. The capacity is strategic. Snape said nothing. Snape said nothing because Dumbledore had just described the things Snape had been refusing to think about for 5 months, which was that Harry Potter was not merely the beneficiary of Covenant magic, but a potential practitioner of it, and the potential meant that Harry was, in the Covenant framework, exactly what the prophecy described, a weapon against Voldemort that Voldemort could not comprehend. Voldemort could not comprehend love. Voldemort could not use Covenant magic. Voldemort was, in the Covenant framework, fundamentally disabled, a wizard of enormous power who was incapable of accessing the most powerful form of magic in existence because the accessing required genuine emotion, and genuine emotion was the one thing Voldemort had systematically destroyed in himself. The prophecy made sense. The prophecy's assertion that Harry had power the Dark Lord knows not was not metaphorical. The power was Covenant magic. The power was love as fuel, care as protection, genuine emotion as the source of enchantments that the Dark Lord could not detect, could not counter, and could not replicate. The prophecy was about Covenant magic. The prophecy had always been about Covenant magic, and Snape, who had delivered the prophecy to Voldemort and set the entire tragedy in motion, was now the person who understood it. The understanding crushed him. It was also in the specific way that terrible knowledge was sometimes useful, clarifying. Snape knew what had to happen. Snape knew the strategy. And Snape, for the first time in 20 years, knew that the strategy was not Dumbledore's to design alone. 6th year was the year of the Horcruxes, and the Horcruxes were where Covenant magic changed the war. Dumbledore had been hunting Horcruxes for 2 years. The ring had been found. The diary had been destroyed years ago. The locket, the cup, the diadem, The snake and Harry remained. Dumbledore's approach to the Horcruxes was conventional. Find them, retrieve them, destroy them with basilisk venom or fiend fire, the brute force methods that overwhelmed the Horcruxes' protections through superior destructive power. Snape proposed something different. Covenant magic can destroy Horcruxes, Snape said, in Dumbledore's office, in October of 6th year. The fire was burning. The portraits were pretending to sleep. Fawkes was molting, which made the office smell like singed feathers. Explain, Dumbledore said. A Horcrux is a soul fragment bound to an object through dark magic. The binding is a covenant, a dark covenant, a covenant of murder. The murderer offers a life, and the offering tears the soul, and the torn piece is bound to the object. The mechanism is covenant magic corrupted to its worst possible application. The Horcrux is a corrupted covenant. The Horcrux is a covenant in which the offering is not freely given, but forcibly taken. The murder victim does not consent. The soul does not consent. The tearing is forced. The forcing corrupts the covenant, and the corruption is what makes the Horcrux so resistant to destruction. Because the corrupted covenant is powered by stolen life rather than given emotion, and stolen life is, paradoxically, more durable than given emotion. More durable, more resistant to external force. A genuine covenant can be dissolved by the caster because the caster made the offering freely and can withdraw it. A corrupted covenant cannot be dissolved because the offering had not been freely made. The victim cannot withdraw what was taken. The Horcrux persists because the stolen offering persists. Then how can covenant magic destroy it? Through a counter-covenant. A genuine offering made against the Horcrux, an offering that overwhelms the stolen offering with the specific quality that the stolen offering lacks, genuine consent. You are proposing to destroy Horcruxes by offering genuine emotion against them. I am proposing to dissolve the corrupted covenant by offering a genuine covenant that contradicts it. The genuine offering says, I give freely. The Horcrux says, I was taken by force. The contradiction, if the genuine offering is strong enough, dissolves the corrupted covenant, and the dissolution releases the soul fragment, and the release destroys the Horcrux. Dumbledore leaned back in his chair. The chair creaked. The fire popped. The portraits had stopped pretending to sleep and were openly listening, because the portraits were portraits and portraits gossiped, but the portraits were also the portraits of Hogwarts headmasters, and the headmasters recognised, even in portrait form, that the conversation they were overhearing was the most significant strategic development in the war. You have tested this? Dumbledore said. I have tested it on a minor cursed object. A ring enchanted with a binding curse, not a Horcrux, but structurally similar. The counter-covenant dissolved the binding. And the offering? A memory of my mother. A memory of Eileen Prince teaching me the old language. The memory was genuine. The counter-covenant accepted it. You used a memory of your mother. The memory was appropriate. My mother preserved the knowledge. The knowledge is destroying the corruption that the knowledge was designed to prevent. The symmetry is not accidental. Dumbledore was quiet for a long time. If this works, Dumbledore said, the Horcrux hunt changes fundamentally. We do not need basilisk venom. We do not need fiend fire. We need genuine emotion and the knowledge of how to offer it. We need someone willing to spend genuine emotion against the most corrupted magic in existence. We need you. We need me. And the cost? The cost is the same as every covenant. The emotional charge of the memory, the warmth, the feeling, spent against the Horcrux, consumed by the counter-covenant. The feeling does not return. You are asking to spend your emotional life against Voldemort's immortality. I am offering to spend what I have against what he stole. The offering is freely given. The giving is the point. The Horcrux hunt accelerated. Snape destroyed the locket in November. The locket was at Grimmauld Place, retrieved by Creature, who had carried it for years in the pathetic hope of fulfilling his dead master Regulus's last wish. The locket was retrieved from Grimmauld Place in November by Dumbledore, who brought it to Snape's quarters wrapped in an enchanted cloth that muted the Horcrux's malevolent emanations. Even through the cloth, Snape could feel the corrupted covenant, the stolen life that powered the Horcrux, the specific quality of the murder that had created it. The murder had been a muggle tramp. Snape could feel this through the covenant perception, could feel the victim's emotional residue embedded in the corrupted covenant. The tramp had been confused, frightened, uncomprehending. The tramp had died not in anger or in battle, but in bewilderment, killed by a teenager for a purpose the tramp could not have understood. The bewilderment was the worst part of the corrupted covenant, the specific cruelty of killing someone who did not understand why they were dying. Snape unwrapped the locket. The locket sat on his desk, a heavy gold oval with a serpentine S on the front, and the S was Slytherin's mark, and the mark was a perversion, Slytherin's legacy reduced to a container for a fragment of a corrupted soul. The locket was dark, malevolent, radiating the corrupted covenant energy that Snape could now feel the way a poisoner could smell arsenic. Snape held the locket. The locket whispered. The whispers were the corrupted covenant's defense mechanism, the Horcrux projecting the victim's stolen emotional energy outward as an attack, weaponizing the grief and fear of the murdered person against anyone who held the object. The whispering said things. The whispering said, "She died because of you." The whispering said, "You told the Dark Lord the prophecy, and the telling killed her." The whispering said, "You are the reason Harry Potter grew up without a mother." The whispers were accurate, and the accuracy was the weapon. The Horcrux used truth because truth was more damaging than lies, and the truth it chose was the truth that Snape carried deepest, the truth that had defined his service and his grief and his entire adult existence. Snape held the locket and listened to the truth and did not flinch, because the truth was not new. The truth was 20 years old. The truth was the thing Snape woke to every morning and carried through every day and took to bed every night, and the carrying had produced over 20 years a callus, and the callus was not numbness but endurance, and the endurance was the strength. Snape offered the counter-covenant. He offered a memory of Lily living, not a memory of Lily dying, not a memory of grief or guilt, but a memory of Lily alive and laughing and existing in the world as a person rather than a casualty. The memory was Lily at 17, in the Hogwarts library, reading, her hair falling across her face, pushing it back with an impatient hand, looking up to find Snape watching, and smiling. The smile. That was the offering. Lily's smile, directed at Snape, genuine and warm and given freely. The counter-covenant formed. The genuine offering met the corrupted covenant. Love met murder. The contradiction was absolute. The locket screamed the way Horcruxes screamed, the specific shriek of a soul fragment being released from its prison, and the screaming lasted 3 seconds, and then the locket was empty. The Horcrux destroyed. The corrupted covenant dissolved by the genuine one. Snape set the locket down. The locket was ordinary now, tarnished metal and old glass, an ugly piece of jewellery with no more magical significance than a muggle brooch. The memory of Lily smiling was gone, not the image, which Snape could still recall. The warmth, the specific emotional charge that the memory had carried for 20 years, the warmth that had sustained Snape through the darkest periods, the warmth that was his, that was Lily's gift. That was the one beautiful thing in a life defined by ugly choices. The warmth was spent. The spending had destroyed a Horcrux. The exchange was fair. Snape destroyed the cup in December. The cup required a different offering. because the cup's corrupted covenant was different, fueled by a different murder, carrying a different emotional weapon. The cup whispered about worthlessness, about the futility of effort, about the specific despair of a man who had spent his life serving two masters and who had achieved nothing for himself. Snape offered a teaching memory, the memory of a fifth-year Ravenclaw named Timothy Alderton, who had arrived at Hogwarts unable to tell aconite from asphodel, and who had, by Owl Year, produced an amortentia so perfect that the steam rising from the cauldron had filled the dungeon with the scent of each student's deepest desire, and the scents had been beautiful. A roomful of longing made visible, and Timothy had looked at Snape with an expression that Snape would carry for the rest of his life, the expression of a student who understood for the first time that his teacher had given him something that could not be measured by grades. The expression was the offering. The Covenant accepted it. The cup screamed and emptied. The diadem was destroyed in January, in the Room of Requirement, where the diadem had sat for 50 years on a bust beneath a wig, surrounded by the accumulated detritus of 1,000 years of students hiding things they wanted to forget. Snape held the diadem. The diadem whispered, as the Horcruxes always whispered, the corrupted Covenant's defense projecting the stolen emotion outward as an attack. The diadem's whisper was different from the lockets and the cups. The diadem whispered about intelligence, about the superiority of the mind, about the futility of emotion in the face of pure reason. The whisper was Voldemort's own voice, or what Voldemort's voice had sounded like when he was 17 and had hidden the diadem here. A voice that was brilliant and cold and absolutely certain that feeling was weakness, and that weakness was the only sin. Feeling is the weakness, the diadem whispered. The mind is sufficient. The mind does not need the heart. The heart is the liability. The heart is what killed Lily Evans. The heart is what enslaves you. Snape listened to the whisper and felt, alongside the discomfort, a recognition. The whisper was saying things Snape had told himself for 20 years. The whisper was articulating the philosophy that Snape had lived by, the philosophy of suppression, the philosophy that said feel less, think more, the mind is the tool, the heart is the obstacle. The philosophy was Voldemort's. The philosophy had been Snape's. The overlap was not coincidental. Snape had adopted Voldemort's emotional philosophy at 17 when Snape had joined the Death Eaters, and the adoption had persisted long after Snape had abandoned Voldemort's political ideology, because the emotional philosophy was independent of the politics. The emotional philosophy said, the mind matters. The heart does not. And Snape had believed this, had lived this, had built his entire adult persona on the foundation of this belief. The belief was wrong. The belief had always been wrong. The Covenants proved it. The Covenants proved that the heart was not a liability but a power source, the most potent power source in magical existence, and the potency was proportional to the genuineness of the feeling. And the genuineness was the thing Voldemort's philosophy denied. Snape offered the counter-covenant. He offered not a memory of Lily, but a memory of walking the Hogwarts corridors at night, alone, the castle quiet around him, the torches burning low, the portraits murmuring. The specific quality of belonging to a place that was alive, and that recognized you, and that welcomed you, despite everything. The welcome. That was the offering. The castle's welcome. The feeling of being recognized by a building that had known him for 25 years, student and teacher and spy and protector, and that had never judged him, and that had simply, continuously been there. The castle's presence. The castle's patience. The castle's ancient, unjudging, completely non-human warmth. The counter-covenant formed. The diadem screamed. The Horcrux dissolved. The corrupted covenant collapsed under the weight of a genuine offering that contradicted its fundamental premise. the premise that the mind was sufficient, the premise that feeling was weakness. He offered the feeling of belonging. And the belonging destroyed the Horcrux that denied feeling's value. The diadem fell silent. The diadem was empty. The stone in the tiara's setting, which had been dark and malevolent, was now merely dull. A piece of old jewellery, historically significant and magically inert. Snape set the diadem down. 3 Horcruxes destroyed. 3 corrupted covenants dissolved by genuine emotion. Destroying Horcruxes was becoming, if not easier, then more natural. Snape was learning the rhythm of the counter-covenants, the particular emotional choreography of offering genuine feeling against corrupted magic, and the learning was, he admitted, the most intellectually satisfying magical work he had ever done. More satisfying than potions. More satisfying than dark arts. More satisfying than any of the magical disciplines Snape had mastered over 30 years of practice. The Covenant work was satisfying because the Covenant work was complete, integrating knowledge and emotion and skill and sacrifice into a single magical act, and the integration was something that no other form of magic required or provided. The integration was also, Snape noted with the self-awareness that was both his gift and his burden, making him a better person. Not a nicer person. Snape would never be nice. But a more integrated person. A person whose outer behaviour and inner life were moving, slowly and grudgingly, toward alignment. The alignment was not comfortable. The alignment required the persona and the person to converge, and the convergence meant that the persona's cruelty was becoming harder to maintain, because the person underneath the persona was no longer willing to be entirely concealed. The person wanted, increasingly, to be seen. The desire was inconvenient, and, Snape suspected, irreversible. Offered a memory of walking the Hogwarts corridors at night, alone, the castle quiet around him, the torches burning low, the portraits murmuring, the specific quality of a building that was alive and that recognized the people who walked its halls. And the recognition was a form of belonging, and belonging was genuine, and the genuineness destroyed the Horcrux. 3 Horcruxes destroyed through Covenant magic, without basilisk venom, without fiend fire, without any of the dramatic, destructive methods that the conventional approach required. 3 Horcruxes dissolved by a man sitting in a room and offering genuine emotion against corrupted magic, the genuine dissolving the corrupted the way light dissolved shadow, not through force, but through presence. The remaining Horcruxes were the Snake and Harry. The Snake was with Voldemort. The Snake would require a confrontation. Harry was Harry. Harry would require something else entirely. Harry's Horcrux is different, Snape told Dumbledore. The other Horcruxes were intentional. Voldemort chose to create them. Harry's Horcrux was accidental, created by the rebound of the killing curse. The accidental creation means the corrupted covenant is weaker, less structured, less bound. The covenant may be dissolvable without Harry's death. Maybe. The weakness of the accidental Horcrux is that the offering had not been deliberately made. The murder was attempted, but not completed. Lily's protection rebounded the curse. The Horcrux was created from the fragment that sheared off during the rebound, not from a completed murder. The corrupted covenant is therefore incomplete. And an incomplete corrupted covenant can be dissolved by a genuine covenant of sufficient power, not a counter-covenant which opposes the corruption. A healing covenant, a covenant that offers genuine care for the person containing the fragment, care strong enough to separate the fragment from the person without destroying either. Care. Genuine care for Harry Potter. And who would make such an offering? The question was aimed at Snape. The question was aimed at the man who had spent 5 years building covenants, the man who possessed the knowledge and the skill and the specific emotional resources that the healing covenant required. Question was, can you care about Harry Potter genuinely enough to save his life? Snape did not answer immediately. Snape did not answer because the answer required honesty, and honesty about his feelings toward Harry Potter was the thing Snape had avoided more assiduously than any other honesty in his life. Harry Potter had his mother's eyes. Harry Potter had his father's face. Harry Potter was the living reminder of everything Snape had loved, and everything Snape had lost, and the specific, irreconcilable combination of the two was the reason Snape could not look at Harry without pain, and could not look away from Harry without guilt. The pain and the guilt were genuine. Were they care? I do not know if I can care about Potter genuinely enough, Snape said. I think you already do, Dumbledore said. I think you have cared about Harry since the moment you looked at him and saw Lily's eyes. I think the caring is the thing you are most angry about, because the caring contradicts the narrative you have built, and the narrative says, I protect Potter because of Lily. The truth says, I protect Potter because of Potter. The truth says nothing of the kind. Then why did you place 17 Covenant wards on his dormitory? 17 Severus. That is not strategic deployment. That is the behavior of a person who is afraid for someone they care about. I am afraid for someone Lily cared about. You are afraid for someone you care about who Lily also cared about, and the caring has become yours, not Lily's, and the becoming is the thing you will not admit. The fire burned, the portraits listened. Fawkes, newly regrown from his molting, sang a single clear note that hung in the air like a question. I will attempt the healing covenant, Snape said. When? When the snake is destroyed. When only Harry's Horcrux remains. When the healing covenant is the last thing required. And the offering? The offering will be genuine. I will ensure the genuineness. You will ensure the genuineness by admitting the care. I will ensure the genuineness by doing whatever the genuineness requires, which is admitting the care, which is whatever the genuineness requires. Dumbledore smiled. Dumbledore smiled like a man who had just won an argument by not winning it, by allowing the other person to arrive at the conclusion without the indignity of being told. Whatever the genuineness requires, Dumbledore agreed. The year continued. Draco Malfoy's mission proceeded, the Vanishing Cabinet, the Death Eater's entrance plan, and Snape watched Draco the way Snape watched everything, with the specific grudging attention of a man who recognized a child being used by adults and who could not intervene without breaking his cover. Draco was 16. Draco had been tasked by Voldemort with killing Dumbledore, which was a task that Draco could not accomplish, and that Draco was destroying himself attempting. The stress visible in the weight loss and the grey skin, and the particular hunted expression of a child who had been given a gun and told to shoot someone he did not hate. Snape watched Draco the way he watched all vulnerable students now, with the Covenant perception that showed him the emotional truth beneath the social performance. Draco's emotional truth was devastating. Draco was a child. Draco was a child who had been given an impossible task by a master who would kill him for failure, and the impossibility and the death threat had reduced Draco to a state of sustained terror that manifested as weight loss, insomnia, and the specific, heartbreaking determination of a 16-year-old who was trying very hard to be brave about something that no amount of bravery could address. The determination was the worst part. Draco's version of courage. The Slytherin version. The version that did not charge forward, but that endured, that persisted, that continued to function under pressure that would have broken most adults. The determination was admirable. It was also destroying Draco from the inside. Snape watched, and could not intervene openly, because the intervention would break the cover, and the cover was the strategy, and the strategy required Snape to appear to be monitoring Draco on Voldemort's behalf rather than protecting Draco from Voldemort's assignment. But Snape could build a covenant. Snape built a covenant on Draco. He offered sympathy, specifically, not compassion, which implied warmth, and not pity, which implied condescension. Sympathy, the specific recognition of another person's suffering, the understanding that Draco's position was not chosen but imposed, the acknowledgement that a child forced into the service of a Dark Lord was a victim regardless of the child's family name or political affiliation. The sympathy was genuine. Snape knew what it was to serve a Dark Lord at a young age. Snape knew what it cost. Snape's covenant on Draco was the covenant of a man who had walked the same road and who was offering, through the magic, the protection that nobody had offered him. The covenant did not prevent the tower. The covenant did not prevent Dumbledore's planned death, which happened in June. On the Astronomy Tower, according to the plan that Dumbledore and Snape had agreed, the plan that required Snape to kill Dumbledore so that Draco would not have to. The killing curse. Dumbledore falling. The plan executing as designed. But the covenant on Dumbledore's office, the covenant Snape had placed 3 years ago, the covenant fueled by a memory of Lily's hands in potions class, that covenant activated at the moment of Dumbledore's death. The activation was not an alert. The activation was a preservation. The covenant preserved something of Dumbledore in the office. Not a ghost, not a portrait, but a resonance. An echo of the man's magical presence that persisted in the warded space. The resonance would be useful later. The resonance would allow Snape to consult with the echo of Dumbledore during the year to come. The year when Snape would be headmaster of a school occupied by Death Eaters, and the consulting would be the only counsel available. The resonance was a gift. The gift was Covenant Magic's response to loss. The magic, built from genuine emotion, responded to the death of someone the caster cared about by preserving what the caring had built. The protection outlived the protected. The covenant outlived the caster. Love persisted. That was the lesson. That was the lesson of Lily's sacrifice, of Snape's covenants, of every genuine offering made against the dark. Love persisted because love was the fuel, and the fuel did not expire when the source was extinguished. The fuel persisted. The light persisted. The protection persisted. Dumbledore was dead. The covenants held. 7th year was the headmastership, and the headmastership was the hardest year. Snape sat in Dumbledore's chair, behind Dumbledore's desk, in Dumbledore's office, and the office's covenant ward pulsed with the resonance of the dead headmaster, and the pulse was simultaneously a comfort and an accusation. The Carrows occupied the school. Amicus Carrow taught dark arts, not defense against the dark arts, but dark arts. The curriculum stripped of the defensive qualifier, and the change was the policy, and the policy was Voldemort's. Alecto Carrow taught Muggle studies, which was not Muggle studies, but anti-Muggle propaganda, the curriculum replaced with hatred dressed in academic language. Snape allowed this. Snape allowed this because it was the cover. The cover was the strategy, and the strategy required Snape to appear to be Voldemort's man at Hogwarts, while secretly being the Covenant's keeper. The protector of the school through invisible means that neither Voldemort nor the Carrows could detect. The Covenants held. The 31 original Covenants, reinforced over 4 years, continued to operate. The wards on the dormitories alerted Snape to threats. The wards on the classrooms mitigated the Carrows' worst punishments. The wards on the Great Hall maintained a baseline of magical stability that prevented the castle's ancient enchantments from degrading under the Carrows' corrupting influence. Snape built new covenants during 7th year. He built them at night in the headmaster's office, with the door locked and the resonance of Dumbledore pulsing in the walls. The offerings were different now. The offerings were not memories of Lily, because the Lily memories were nearly spent. The emotional charges consumed by 4 years of Covenant building. The offerings were not teaching memories, because the teaching had stopped, because Snape was no longer teaching, because the headmastership had removed him from the classroom and placed him behind a desk where the only thing he taught was how to survive under occupation. The offerings were present tense emotions, not memories. Feelings, current, active, immediate feelings that Snape was experiencing in real time and offering in real time. The feelings were protectiveness, the fierce, angry, desperate protectiveness of a man who was watching children be hurt and who could not openly intervene, and who was pouring the protectiveness into covenants, because the covenants were the intervention that the occupation could not see. The protectiveness was genuine. The protectiveness expressed itself in specific, nightly actions that nobody witnessed and that nobody would learn about until after the war. Each night, after the Carrows had finished their patrols and the castle had settled into the tense, watchful quiet of an occupied building, Snape left the headmaster's office and walked the corridors. The walk was not patrol, but Covenant maintenance, the nightly circuit that Snape had developed to check the existing wards and build new ones where the need was greatest. The circuit began in the dungeons, the Slytherin common room first, because the Slytherin students were in the most dangerous position. Children of Death Eaters attending a school run by Death Eaters, expected to participate in the Carrows' cruelty and punished if they refused. The Slytherin students who refused, and there were more of them than anyone outside Slytherin knew, were protected by a covenant Snape had built in September. A covenant fueled by the specific, complicated emotion of a man who had been a Slytherin who had made terrible choices, and who was watching Slytherin children face the same choices, and who wanted, with a ferocity that surprised him, to give them the option he had not had. The option was, refuse and survive. The Covenant's protection did not prevent the refusal's consequences, which were the Carrows' punishments. The Covenant mitigated the punishments. The Covenant allowed the Slytherin students who chose to refuse to survive the refusal, and surviving was the option, and the option was what Snape had lacked at their age, and that absence was the fuel. The circuit continued to the Hufflepuff common room, where the Covenant responded to the specific emotional texture of a house that was maintaining communal care under conditions designed to break communal care. The Hufflepuff Covenant was fueled by admiration, which was a genuine emotion that Snape had not previously recognized as present in his repertoire, but which was, he discovered, abundant. Snape admired the Hufflepuffs. Snape admired their stubbornness, their infrastructure, their refusal to stop taking care of each other even when taking care was risky. The admiration was fuel, and the fuel was potent. The Ravenclaw common room. The Covenant there was fueled by intellectual kinship, the genuine respect of a brilliant man for a house that valued brilliance, the recognition that the Ravenclaw students' approach to the occupation, which was analytical and strategic and involved documenting everything, was exactly right. The Gryffindor common room. The Covenant was fueled by, and Snape would never have admitted this to anyone alive, respect for their courage. Not admiration. Respect. The distinction mattered to Snape, who maintained hierarchies of emotional response the way other people maintained filing systems. Respect was warmer than acknowledgement and cooler than admiration. Respect was what Snape felt for people who did the right thing loudly, which was the Gryffindor approach, and which was effective even when it was not subtle. And the effectiveness was the basis for the respect. The circuit took 2 hours. The circuit produced, over the course of 7th year, approximately 240 covenants, each built from a genuine emotional offering. Each invisible to the Carrows and to Voldemort, each contributing to the network of protection that made the school survivable. 240 offerings. 240 genuine emotions felt and given freely in the corridors of a castle under occupation by a man who had spent his adult life avoiding genuine emotion and who was now, in the darkest year, producing it at a rate that would have astonished anyone who knew him. The production was not effortless. The production was exhausting. Each offering required the lowering of the occlumency barriers, the accessing of the genuine emotion, the offering, and the rebuilding. The cycle took approximately 5 minutes per covenant. 5 minutes of emotional vulnerability in a corridor where a Carrow might appear at any moment. 5 minutes of Snape standing in the dark with his barriers down and his emotions exposed and the magic flowing through him like current through a wire. The 5 minutes were the most dangerous 5 minutes of Snape's day. More dangerous than the Death Eater meetings, more dangerous than the conversations with Voldemort. The Death Eater meetings required the persona. The corridor required the person. And the person, unprotected by occlumency, standing in the dark, feeling the feelings that the persona concealed, was the most vulnerable version of Severus Snape that existed. The vulnerability was the power. It was always the power. The book had been right from the beginning. The most powerful magic in the world required the caster to be vulnerable, because vulnerability was authenticity, and authenticity was the fuel, and the fuel was everything. The protectiveness was the most genuine thing Snape had felt since finding the book, because the protectiveness was not complicated by memory or grief or the 20-year-old tangle of Lily and James and the choices that had led to the war. The protectiveness was simple. Children were being hurt. Snape was protecting them. The simplicity was the genuineness, and the genuineness was the fuel, and the fuel was producing covenants of a power that exceeded anything Snape had previously built. Present tense emotion was more potent than memory. The book had suggested this. In a passage Snape had not fully understood until now, the offering made in the moment of feeling is stronger than the offering made from the recollection of feeling, as a fire is stronger than the memory of a fire. The present tense covenants were fires. The present tense covenants burned with the immediate heat of a man who was, despite everything, despite the cover and the strategy and the 20 years of suppression, a teacher, and the teacher was watching his students suffer, and the suffering produced an emotional response that Snape could no longer suppress, because the suppression would prevent the covenants, and the covenants were the only thing keeping the students alive. Snape stopped suppressing. The decision was not dramatic, not a revelation or a breakdown or a cathartic moment of emotional release. It was a practical decision, made in the headmaster's office at 3 a.m. while building a covenant to protect the Gryffindor common room from the Carrow's midnight raids. The practical decision was, I cannot protect these children if I do not allow myself to feel what I feel about these children. The feeling is the fuel. The fuel is the protection. The protection requires the feeling. Therefore, feel. Snape felt. The release was enormous. 20 years of accumulated care compressed by suppression into something dense and volatile. And the decompression was not gentle. The decompression was like opening a valve on a pipe that had been building pressure for 2 decades. The pressure releasing in a sustained, powerful, entirely overwhelming rush. Snape cared about the students. Snape cared about Neville Longbottom, who was leading the resistance with a courage that exceeded anything Snape had seen from a student in 20 years of teaching. Snape cared about Ginny Weasley, who was protecting younger students with a ferocity that was entirely Molly, and entirely Ginny, and entirely admirable. Snape cared about Luna Lovegood, who maintained her strange, gentle, unshakable kindness in the face of cruelty that would have broken most adults. Snape cared about all of them. The caring expressed itself through the covenants, through the nightly circuit, through the invisible protections that reduced the Carrow's cruelty from devastating to survivable. But the caring also expressed itself in smaller ways that the Covenants did not require, but that the caring produced naturally. The way a fire produced light as well as heat, the light not the purpose, but the consequence. A first-year Gryffindor named Thomas Hendricks was targeted by the Carrows in October. Thomas was Muggle-born. Thomas was small. Thomas had made the mistake of asking Amicus Carrow a question during a dark arts class. A genuine question. The kind of question that a first year asked when the first year did not understand the material and expected the teacher to teach. Amicus had used the Cruciatus curse on Thomas as a classroom demonstration. The curse lasted 4 seconds. 4 seconds of a dark curse applied to an 11-year-old body. Snape felt the Covenant trigger. The ward on the classroom detected the harm. The mitigation covenant activated, reducing the curse's intensity by approximately 40%, the maximum reduction that would not be detectable by the caster. 40%, 60% of a Cruciatus curse applied to an 11-year-old for 4 seconds. The mitigation was significant. The mitigation was also insufficient. Thomas was taken to the hospital wing. Thomas did not speak for 3 days. Snape visited Thomas in the hospital wing at midnight. The visit was not recorded. The visit was not witnessed, because Snape had placed a covenant on the hospital wing that concealed his presence from the Carrow's monitoring enchantments, and the concealment was the protection within the protection, the secret inside the secret. Thomas was awake. Thomas was staring at the ceiling. Thomas's eyes were open, and his expression was the expression of a child who had been hurt by an adult in a place where adults were supposed to protect him. And the expression was, Snape recognized, identical to expressions Snape had seen in his own mirror at 11, at 12, at every age, when Tobias Snape had demonstrated that adults were not always the protection they were supposed to be. Hendricks, Snape said. Thomas flinched. Thomas flinched the way a child flinched when he associated adult attention with pain. I am not going to hurt you, Snape said. The sentence was simple, and the sentence was necessary, and the sentence was the hardest sentence Snape had spoken since Look at Me in Always. You're the headmaster, Thomas said. I am the headmaster. You let them do it. I was not present in the classroom. You're the headmaster. You're supposed to stop them. I am supposed to do many things. Not all of them are possible simultaneously. Why not? Snape looked at the child. At the 11-year-old Muggle-born who had been tortured for asking a question and who was now asking another question, and the question was either courage or confusion or the specific, stubborn quality of a child who believed that questions deserved answers regardless of who was answering. Because stopping them openly would remove me from the school, Snape said, and my removal would remove the protections that are currently reducing the severity of their punishments. Reducing. The curse that was used on you was mitigated. The curse you experienced was approximately 60% of the curse's full intensity. That was 60%? That was 60%. Thomas was quiet. The hospital wing was dark. The candles burned low. The ceiling held the covenant warmth that Snape had placed there 3 years ago. What's the 100% feel like? Thomas asked. I have experienced the 100%. The experience is not something I would describe to an 11-year-old. I'm the 11-year-old who experienced the 60%. You are the 11-year-old who experienced the 60%, and the 60% is more than you should have experienced, and the more than is the thing I am working to prevent. You're working to prevent it? I am working to prevent it through means that I cannot explain, and that you cannot see, and that require me to appear to be permitting the thing I am preventing. That's confusing. War is confusing. Thomas looked at Snape. Snape looked at Thomas. The looking lasted 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds, Thomas Hendricks saw something in the headmaster's face that Thomas would remember for the rest of his life. The specific, unguarded, completely genuine expression of a man who was in pain because a child was in pain, and whose pain was the proof that the protection was real. "Okay," Thomas said. "Okay? Okay, I don't understand. But okay. The not understanding is appropriate. The understanding would require information that you cannot safely possess. Okay, go to sleep, Hendricks. Yes, sir. When you return to classes, do not ask questions in Caro's classroom. Ask questions in other classrooms. Ask questions everywhere else. The asking is important. The asking in Caro's classroom is dangerous. Yes, sir. Go to sleep." Thomas went to sleep. Snape stood beside the bed for several minutes, watching the child sleep, feeling the Covenant's pulse in the walls around them, the warmth and the protection, and the invisible, permanent, freely given care that was the only thing keeping the children of Hogwarts alive. Snape left the hospital wing. Snape walked back to the headmaster's office through corridors that were dark and cold and full of the specific, occupied castle silence that was the silence of a building being used against its nature. In the headmaster's office, Snape sat at the desk and built a new covenant. He offered the visit itself. The emotion of the visit, the specific, painful, genuine experience of standing beside a child's hospital bed and being unable to explain the protection and being required to maintain the persona and being, in the moment of the visiting, more honest than the persona allowed. The honesty was the offering. The covenant was the strongest Snape built that week. Every student, every child in the castle who was enduring an occupation that Snape had allowed because the appearance of compliance was the strategy, and the strategy required the appearance of compliance, while the compliance concealed the covenants and the covenants concealed the care. The care was the secret inside the secret inside the secret. The care was the thing at the centre, the thing that everything else was built around. The thing that Snape had carried for 20 years without admitting it, and that was now, in the darkness of the headmaster's office with the portraits watching and the resonance of Dumbledore pulsing in the walls, admitted, Snape cared. Snape had always cared. The caring had always been the point. The covenants built during 7th year were the strongest Snape ever produced. The covenants were powered by present tense protectiveness, by the immediate emotional response of a man watching children suffer and channeling the response into magic. The covenants protected dormitories and common rooms and classrooms and corridors. The covenants reduced the Carrow's curses from devastating to damaging, from damaging to painful, from painful to bearable. The covenants did not eliminate the suffering, because eliminating the suffering would have been detectable, and detection would have ended the covenants and everything they protected. The covenants made the suffering survivable. The survivable was the goal. The goal was not perfection. The goal was survival, day by day, student by student, covenant by covenant, until the war ended and the survival became permanent. Neville noticed. Neville, who spent 7th year leading the resistance from the room of requirement, who bore the brunt of the Carrow's punishments, because Neville's role as leader made him the primary target. Neville noticed that the punishments were less severe than they should have been. "Something's protecting us," Neville told Ginny and Luna in the room of requirement in February. "Protecting how?" "The Cruciatus. When the Carrows use it on me, the curse is... it's there, it's real, but it's not as bad as it should be. The curse is being, I don't know, cushioned. Something in the castle is absorbing part of the curse. I can feel it. When the curse hits, there's a moment where the pain should escalate, but doesn't, like something is catching the worst of it. Who would be cushioning the Cruciatus? I don't know. Someone with enough power to modify a dark curse in real time without the caster noticing. There's only one person in the castle with that kind of power. Snape? Snape is protecting us from the Carrows. Snape is the headmaster. Snape is Voldemort's man. Snape killed Dumbledore. Snape is cushioning the Cruciatus curse on students in his school. The contradiction was the mystery of 7th year. The mystery that Neville and the Resistance could not resolve because the resolution required information they did not have. Information about Covenant magic and the book and the Covenants and the man in the headmaster's office who was spending his emotional life, night after night, building protections that nobody could see and nobody could thank him for, and that kept through the darkest year in Hogwarts history the children alive. The battle came in May. Harry returned. The Dar activated. The order arrived. The castle prepared for war. Snape left the headmaster's office. Leaving was the plan's final stage, the stage that required Snape to appear to flee, to leave the castle in apparent defeat, so that the Death Eaters would not suspect that the headmaster they believed was their ally had been, for an entire year, the school's secret protector. Snape did not flee. Snape went to the Shrieking Shack, which was where Voldemort was, which was where the snake was, which was where the last external Horcrux lived. The snake needed to die. Neville would kill the snake with the sword as Dumbledore had planned, as the prophecy's secondary interpretation suggested. But the snake's death needed to happen at a specific moment, after Voldemort believed the Elder Wand was his, after the chain of events that would lead to Harry's confrontation with the Killing Curse. Snape went to the Shack, because the Shack was where Voldemort was planning to secure the Elder Wand's allegiance by killing Snape. Because Voldemort believed Snape was the Wand's master, because Snape had killed Dumbledore, and killing the master transferred the allegiance. Voldemort was wrong. The Elder Wand's allegiance had passed from Dumbledore to Snape to Harry through the chain that Snape had engineered in 6th year. The wand was Harry's. Voldemort's killing of Snape would not transfer the allegiance because Snape was not the current master. Snape knew this. Snape went to the Shack in the early hours of the battle. The castle was under siege behind him, the spells and the screaming and the specific terrible sound of a building fighting for its life. Snape walked through the grounds toward the Shrieking Shack, through the tunnel, through the dark. It was the last walk. Snape knew this. The knowledge was not fear, though fear was present. It was acceptance. The specific acceptance of a man who had spent 20 years preparing for a death that served a purpose, and who was now walking toward the death, and who was discovering in the walking that preparation and readiness were not the same thing. Preparation was intellectual, readiness was emotional. Snape had prepared for 20 years. Snape had been ready for approximately 3 minutes, the 3 minutes since he had left the castle's front door and walked into the dark. The 3 minutes of readiness were the 3 minutes in which Snape lowered every barrier, every occlumency wall, every defensive construct, every carefully maintained separation between the persona and the person. It was total. The preparation for the final covenant, because the final covenant required the most genuine offering Snape had ever made, and genuineness required the complete absence of defense. Snape walked to the Shack with his barriers down and his emotions exposed and the night air cold on his face, and he walked like a man who had finally, after 40 years of concealment, allowed himself to be completely, vulnerably, defenselessly himself. The self was a man who loved a dead woman and her living son and the castle he had protected and the students he had taught and the covenants he had built and the book he had found and the mother who had preserved it and the grandmother who had hidden it and the great-grandmother who had written about it, and the line of women who had carried the knowledge through centuries of suppression and who were now, through Snape, through the male inheritor who had never been expected, offering the knowledge's final and greatest expression. All of this was the self, and the self was the offering, and the final offering was ready. Snape went to the shack, knowing that Voldemort would kill him, knowing that the killing would not achieve what Voldemort intended, knowing that the death was part of the plan. Snape went to the shack carrying one final covenant. The covenant was prepared, the offering chosen, the words composed. The covenant was the healing covenant, the covenant that would dissolve Harry's Horcrux. He offered no memory of Lily, no teaching memory, no anger or pride or protectiveness. He offered an admission. The admission was, I care about Harry Potter. Not because of Lily, not because of the prophecy, not because of the plan. I care about Harry Potter because Harry Potter is a child I have watched grow for 6 years. A child I have protected and resented and tested and infuriated. A child who has his mother's eyes and his father's worst qualities and his own specific, irreplaceable, maddening, extraordinary quality of being Harry. The care was genuine. The care had been genuine for years. The care was the thing Snape had refused to admit, because admitting it would have meant that the protection was not about Lily, was not about guilt, was not about the 20-year-old debt that defined Snape's service. The care was about Harry. The care was about a boy who deserved better than the adults in his life had given him, including Snape, especially Snape, and the especially was the thing Snape was finally, in the shrieking shack, with Voldemort's snake coiling and Voldemort's wand raised, willing to say, I care about Harry Potter. I have always cared about Harry Potter. The caring had never been about Lily alone. It was about the boy. Voldemort ordered the snake to attack. The snake struck. The fangs pierced Snape's throat. The venom entered his blood. Snape fell. Snape lay on the shrieking shack floor, bleeding, dying, and with the last of his conscious will, Snape activated the healing covenant. The covenant required an offering made at the moment of greatest genuineness. The moment of dying was, it turned out, the moment of greatest genuineness, because dying stripped away every pretense and every defense and every carefully maintained persona and left only the truth. The truth was the offering. The truth was, I loved Lily Evans, and the loving defined my life, and from the loving grew the caring for her son. And the caring grew beyond Lily into something that was mine, not hers, and that something was the care for Harry Potter as himself, as the boy, as the child I watched and protected and tormented, and who became, despite everything, someone I could not bear to lose. The healing covenant activated. The covenant reached through the castle's magical infrastructure, through the network of wards and protections that Snape had built over 4 years, through the covenants that connected the dungeons to the dormitories, and the dormitories to the tower, and the tower to the grounds. The covenant found Harry. The covenant found the Horcrux in Harry's scar. The covenant offered the truth against the corruption. The truth dissolved the corrupted covenant. The genuine offering met the incomplete, accidental, forcibly created Horcrux, and the encounter was not a battle but a healing, the genuine care enveloping the corrupted fragment and separating it from the boy it had been attached to for 16 years. The Horcrux dissolved. The fragment released. The scar remained. But the scar was empty. The corruption gone, replaced by the residue of a genuine covenant, the final protection of a man who had spent his last breath caring about a boy he had pretended to hate. Harry felt it. Harry, in the castle, preparing for the confrontation with Voldemort, felt the Horcrux leave. The departure was not painful. It was warm. The warmth of a protection settling over him, the specific warmth of being cared about by someone who had never said so. Harry did not know the source. Harry would learn the source later, from Snape's memories. Given in the shack alongside the blood and the tears and the last request, look at me. Harry looked. Harry saw Lily's eyes in his own face, the eyes that Snape had loved for 23 years, the eyes that had been the beginning of everything. Snape died. Snape died on the floor of the Shrieking Shack with Harry's eyes the last thing he saw. And the death was the cost. And the cost was, Snape thought in the last moment, exactly proportional to the offering. It was the most genuine thing Snape had ever produced. The offering had destroyed a Horcrux without destroying the boy. The offering had worked. It had always been going to work, because the fuel was love, and love did not fail. Snape died. The covenants held. Every covenant Snape had built over 4 years held through the Battle of Hogwarts. The dormitory wards held. The classroom protections held. The Great Hall's stability enchantment held. The wards on Dumbledore's office held. The resonance of the dead headmaster pulsing in the walls through the night of the battle. The wards reduced casualties. The wards could not prevent casualties, because the wards were protections, and protections mitigated rather than eliminated, but the mitigating saved lives. Students who should have died survived because curses that should have killed were weakened by covenants that the casters could not detect. Neville felt the cushioning during the battle, the same cushioning he had felt during the Carrows Cruciatus, and the cushioning was proof. Snape had protected them. Even in death, Snape's covenants held, because the covenants were powered by genuine emotion, and genuine emotion did not expire when the source was extinguished. Love persisted. The covenants persisted. The protections persisted. Snape was dead. The children were alive, and the book was in the headmaster's office, where Snape had left it, behind the 3 layers of protective enchantment and the Fidelius charm whose secret died with him. The Fidelius dissolved upon Snape's death, the way all Fidelius charms dissolved when the secret keeper died, and the book became visible on the shelf behind the headmaster's desk, wrapped in the cloth that smelled like mothballs and spinner's end, and a house where nobody had been happy. McGonagall found the book. McGonagall could not read it, because the language was the old language, the pre-Roman magical script that only the Prince line could read. McGonagall brought the book to the Department of Mysteries, where the Unspeakables attempted translation and failed, and then to the British Museum's restricted magical archive, where the archivists attempted translation and also failed, and then back to Hogwarts, where the book sat on the shelf and refused to be read by anyone who was not a prince. Harry visited the headmaster's office 10 years after the war. The office was McGonagall's now, decorated differently, the silver instruments replaced by tartan cushions and photographs of former students. But the portrait of Severus Snape hung on the wall, between Dumbledore and the headmistress who had preceded him, and the portrait was awake and watching. "Potter," the portrait said. "Professor, you are in my office. It's Professor McGonagall's office. The office is the office. The occupant changes. The office persists, like the covenants." The portrait was quiet for a moment. The portrait's expression shifted, the painted face moving through something that was not quite surprise and not quite gratitude, but that was adjacent to both. "You know about the covenants," the portrait said. "I know about the covenants. I saw them in your memories. I felt them during the battle. I feel them every time I walk through the castle. The warmth in the dungeons, the protections on the dormitories, the ward on this office that still carries the emotional signature of Lily's hands. You can feel the signatures. I could always feel them. I didn't know what they were until I saw your memories. The covenant perception. You inherited it from Lily. I inherited the capacity. You gave me the understanding. I gave you memories in a vial while bleeding to death on a dirty floor. The delivery method was lacking." Harry sat down. The office was warm. The portraits on the walls were listening, the accumulated headmasters and headmistresses of Hogwarts attending the conversation with the particular attention they reserved for things that mattered. "The book," Harry said. "The Covenant book. It's on the shelf. Nobody can read it. The book is in the old language. The language is Prince family knowledge. The knowledge was passed through the maternal line. Nobody in the Prince line survives. The Prince line survives through you. Harry looked at the portrait. The portrait looked back with the specific, evaluating gaze that Snape had directed at Harry for 6 years, and that Harry had always interpreted as hostility, but which was, Harry now understood, assessment, the gaze of a man who was constantly evaluating whether the boy was ready. Through me, Harry said. Through Lily. The Covenant capacity is inherited. Lily had it. You have it. Your children will have it. My son. Your son. The one you named. Albus Severus. A name of considerable emotional complexity. A name of considerable accuracy. 2 men who protected me through means I didn't understand, using magic I couldn't see, making sacrifices I didn't know about. The emotional complexity is the accuracy. Yes, Potter the book. You cannot read it. Not yet. The language can be learned. The learning requires exposure. Spend time with the book. Speak to it. The book responds to the Prince inheritance. The inheritance in your blood will respond to the book. The language will come. How long? Months, years, the language is old. The old does not rush. And when I can read it, when you can read it, you will understand what I understood. The magic is not light or dark. The magic is genuine. The fuel is not power or skill. The fuel is truth. And the truth, Potter, is available to anyone who is willing to feel it. Anyone. Anyone. The magic is democratic. The magic does not recognize institutions or classifications or the distinctions that the ministry maintains. The magic recognizes only the covenant. What are you willing to give? What do you receive in return? The question is the magic. The answer is the power. Harry looked at the portrait of Severus Snape, the painted face of a man who had spent his life concealing the most important thing about himself, and who was now, in portrait form, offering the knowledge freely, offering the inheritance, offering the final gift. Thank you, Professor, Harry said. Do not thank me. Learn the language. Read the book. Teach the children. Teach the children. The children are the point, Potter. The children have always been the point. The covenants protect the children. The book teaches the protecting. The teaching is the inheritance. Pass the inheritance forward. To anyone who is willing to feel it. To anyone. The portrait settled into its frame. The painted eyes closed. The conversation was over, and the office was quiet, and the book sat on the shelf, wrapped in cloth that smelled like mothballs, waiting for the next reader, waiting for the next practitioner, waiting for the next person in the long line of people who were willing to give what was genuine and receive what the giving earned. The book waited patiently. The book had waited in a trunk in an attic for 40 years. The book had waited for Eileen Prince, and then for Severus Snape, and now for Harry Potter, and then, eventually, for Albus Severus Potter, and for every child after that who carried the Prince inheritance and the willingness to feel. The waiting would be rewarded, as it always was, because genuine emotion was the one resource that humans produced in unlimited quantities, and human feeling was the fuel. The fuel was the magic, and the magic was the giving. The giving was done. It was enough. And yet the giving would never truly be done. It was the practice. And the practice was the life. The life continued in the book, and the castle, and the children, and the warmth in the walls, the warmth that Snape had placed there, and that would persist for as long as the castle stood, and probably longer. Because genuine emotion, once given, did not stop. It went on. In the dungeons, where Snape had taught for 20 years, the potions classroom retained the densest concentration of Covenant warmth in the school. The warmth had accumulated through 2 decades of teaching, through 2 decades of genuinely caring about whether Neville Longbottom's cauldron exploded and whether Hermione Granger's draught of peace was properly stirred, and whether the hundreds of students who passed through the dungeon classroom left knowing more about the subtle science and exact art than they had known when they arrived. The caring had been invisible. The caring had been wrapped in sarcasm and disdain and the specific abrasive Snape delivery that made students believe they were being tolerated rather than taught. But the caring had been there, in every corrected technique and every deducted point and every grudging acceptable on an essay that was merely good and every silent outstanding on an essay that was excellent, the silent grade the only one Snape trusted because the silent grade was the grade that could not be performed. The classroom was warm. The classroom would be warm for centuries. The warmth was the accumulated residue of a man who had stood behind a desk for 20 years and cared, badly and angrily and with great difficulty, about whether the children in front of him learned what he was teaching. The children had learned. Not all of them, not everything, but enough. Enough to brew a draught of living death. Enough to identify aconite. Enough to understand that potions was not about following instructions, but about understanding the principles beneath the instructions. The way covenant magic was not about performing rituals, but about understanding the emotions beneath the rituals. Understanding was the inheritance, and the inheritance was the teaching. And the teaching was love. Snape would have hated that sentence. Snape would have called the sentence sentimental and imprecise, and entirely too comfortable with the word love. A word Snape had used exactly once in his life, in Dumbledore's office, when Dumbledore had asked after all this time, and Snape had said always and the always had contained the word love without using it, because Snape could not use the word any more than Snape could have turned his Patronus into something other than a doe. The doe was the love. The Patronus was the love. The covenants were the love. Every genuine thing Snape had ever done was the love, expressed through the only channels Snape's personality permitted, indirect, invisible, deniable, and permanent. The permanence was the final quality. The permanence was the covenant's promise. What is genuinely given does not expire. The giving continues. The protection continues. The warmth continues. In the walls, in the stone, in the castle that breathed around the children who slept in dormitories warmed by a dead man's care. The castle breathed. The covenants held. The warmth persisted. And somewhere in the oldest part of the castle, in the foundations, in the stone that held 1,000 years of magic and memory, the warmth that Severus Snape had placed there settled deeper, became part of the castle's own warmth, became indistinguishable from the warmth that the founders had placed a millennium before, became what it had always been, a teacher's love for the children he taught, embedded in the building where the teaching happened, permanent and invisible and enough. Harry defeated Voldemort in the Great Hall. The Elder Wand refused to kill its master. The killing curse rebounded. Voldemort fell. In the days after the battle, while the castle was being cleared and the dead were being mourned and the living were beginning the impossible work of continuing, Harry walked through Hogwarts at night. The walking was aimless, the movement of a person who needed to move because stillness was unbearable. Harry walked the corridors at 2 a.m, at 3, at 4, when the castle was empty except for the ghosts and the portraits and the covenants. Harry could feel the covenants. The covenants were in the walls, in the floor, in the ceiling, in every surface that Snape had warded over 4 years. The covenants produced a warmth that was not temperature, but presence. The presence of genuine care embedded in stone. The presence of a man who had loved the castle and its children, and who had expressed the love through magic that the children could not see. Harry walked through the warmth. The warmth was in the dungeons, Snape's territory, the corridors where Snape had built the densest network of covenants, because the dungeons were where Snape spent the most time, and the spending of time was the spending of care, and the care had accumulated in the stone over 4 years. The warmth was in the Gryffindor corridors. The warmth was in the hospital wing. The warmth was in the defense classroom, where the mitigation covenant was still active, still softening curses that were no longer being cast, still protecting students from a threat that no longer existed. The covenant did not know the threat was gone. The covenant persisted because the feeling that fueled it persisted, because Snape's anger at Umbridge's blood quill did not expire when Umbridge left the school, because the anger was about the principle, not the person, and the principle was permanent. Harry felt the covenants and understood, in the specific way that walking through someone's love taught you about them, that Snape had cared. Not about the strategy. Not about the plan. About the people. That understanding was the final gift. In the aftermath, Harry found Snape's body. In the shrieking shack. The body was still. The blood had stopped flowing. The face was, for the first time in Harry's experience, at rest, the permanent sneer absent, the defensive hostility gone, the face of a man who had, in the end, let the walls down. Harry sat beside the body. Harry held Snape's memories, the vial of silver that Snape had given with the last of his strength, and the memories were the final offering, the final covenant, the final genuine act of a man who had spent his life concealing genuine acts. The memories told the story. The memories showed Lily in the playground and the friendship and the falling away. The memories showed the prophecy and the guilt and the turning. The memories showed Dumbledore and the plan and the 20 years of service. And the memories showed the book, the covenants, the offerings, the slow, painful, stubborn process of a man learning to feel by learning to give what he felt to the magic. Harry watched the memories in the pensieve. Harry saw the covenants being built, one by one, fueled by memories of Lily and then by memories of teaching, and then by present tense emotion of a headmaster protecting his school. Harry saw the healing covenant. Harry saw the offering. Harry saw the admission that Snape had made in the moment of dying. I care about Harry Potter. I have always cared about Harry Potter. The caring had never been about Lily alone. Harry sat beside the pensieve for a very long time. The office was quiet. The portraits were awake, watching. Dumbledore's portrait was watching with an expression that was, for Dumbledore, unusually still. He cared about me, Harry said. Yes, Dumbledore's portrait said. He hated me. He pretended to hate you. The pretending was the cover. The caring was the truth. The caring destroyed the Horcrux. The caring saved your life, as Lily's caring saved your life. The mechanism is the same. The fuel is the same. The source was different, but the love, Harry, the love was real. He never told me. He told you in the only way he could. Through the magic, through the covenants, through 17 wards on your dormitory, and a healing covenant offered in the moment of his death. 17 wards. 17. Severus placed 17 covenant protections on the room where you slept. Not because Dumbledore ordered it. Not because the strategy required it. Because Severus Snape was afraid for a boy he cared about, and the fear produced care, and the care produced magic, and the magic protected the boy. Harry was quiet. The office was quiet. The castle was quiet. The post-battle quiet of a building that had survived. The covenants are still active, Harry said. I can feel them. In the walls. In the corridors. They're still there. The covenants will persist as long as the emotion that fueled them remains genuine. Genuine emotion does not expire. The covenants will persist indefinitely. Snape's love is in the walls of Hogwarts. Snape's love has been in the walls of Hogwarts for 4 years. The love was always there. The walls simply made it visible. Harry left the office. Harry walked through the castle. The corridors were damaged, scorched, rubble-strewn. But beneath the damage, in the stone itself, Harry could feel the covenants. The warmth, the protections, the accumulated emotional investment of a man who had spent 4 years pouring his genuine feelings into the castle's foundations. The castle was warm. The castle had always been warm. And the warmth was not the fireplaces or the enchantments or the centuries of accumulated magic. The warmth was Snape. The warmth was a dead man's love, embedded in the stone, persisting beyond the death, protecting the children who would walk these corridors for generations. The warmth would persist. The warmth was Covenant Magic's final gift, the assurance that love, once genuinely given, did not end. The love continued. The love protected. The love remained in the walls and the stone and the ancient, patient architecture of a castle that held everything it was given and gave it back, slowly, gently, over centuries. Snape's covenants held. The castle breathed. The children were alive. And somewhere in the stone, in the foundations, in the deep places where the covenants lived, the warmth continued, constant and invisible and genuine, the final offering of a man who had learned, too late and just in time, that the walls he had built around his heart were not protection but prison, and that the tearing down was not weakness, but the oldest magic in the world. The oldest magic, the magic of giving freely. The magic of genuine care offered without expectation of return, the magic held. McGonagall discovered the covenants 3 months after the war. McGonagall was repairing the castle, the extensive, painstaking, stone-by-stone reconstruction that the Battle of Hogwarts had necessitated, and the repairing required magical surveying, and the surveying revealed anomalies. The anomalies were the covenants. The surveyor's enchantments, designed to map the castle's magical infrastructure, could not identify the covenants, because the covenants were invisible to standard magical detection. But the surveyors could see the effects of the covenants, the way you could see the effects of wind without seeing the wind itself. The castle's magical infrastructure was stronger than it should have been. The wards were more resilient. The protections were more layered. The castle had been reinforced, invisibly, comprehensively, by something the surveyors could not classify. There is an unknown magical layer throughout the castle, the chief surveyor told McGonagall. We cannot identify it. We cannot remove it. The layer is integrated into the castle's foundational enchantments at a level that predates the founders' original construction. Predates the founders. The magical signature is older than the castle. The layer uses a form of magic that our instruments do not recognize. The form is not wand-based. The form appears to be fueled by an energy source that is not magical in the conventional sense. Not magical. Emotional, the energy source appears to be emotional. The layer is fueled by genuine human emotion embedded in the castle stone. McGonagall sat in the headmaster's office, which was now her office, and thought about Snape. McGonagall had known Snape for 20 years. McGonagall had distrusted Snape for most of those years, because Snape's behaviour invited distrust. Because the persona was designed to invite distrust, because the distrust was the cover, and the cover was the strategy, and the strategy required McGonagall to believe that Snape was, at best, a compromised ally, and at worst, a traitor. The Covenants changed the story. The Covenants told a story that the persona had concealed, a story of a man who had spent 4 years embedding genuine emotion into the walls of a school, protecting students through invisible means, building a magical infrastructure of care that was more durable and more powerful than any of the conventional protections that the school's defenders had employed. The story was the truth. The truth was the thing the persona had hidden. And the truth, embedded in stone, invisible and permanent, was the final expression of Severus Snape's character. A man who did extraordinary things for people who would never know he had done them. McGonagall left the covenants in place. McGonagall left them because the covenants were protections, and the protections were valuable, and the value outweighed any institutional impulse to remove or classify or control. McGonagall left them because removing them would have required understanding them, and understanding them would have required feeling what Snape had felt when he built them. And feeling what Snape had felt was not something McGonagall was prepared to do, because feeling what Snape had felt would have meant acknowledging that the man she had considered a colleague and a possible traitor had loved the students of Hogwarts with a depth and a consistency that exceeded anything McGonagall had seen in her 40 years of teaching. The acknowledgement would come later. The acknowledgement would come gradually, over years, as McGonagall felt the covenants working, felt the warmth in the corridors, felt the protections activate during minor crises and major storms and the ordinary, daily, unremarkable business of running a school full of magical children. The covenants worked. The covenants continued to work. The covenants would continue to work for as long as the castle stood, because the fuel did not expire, because genuine emotion, once offered, was permanent, because love did not have a half-life. Snape's love was in the walls. Snape's love would be in the walls forever. Years later, students would notice. Students would notice that certain corridors in Hogwarts were warmer than others, that certain classrooms felt safer, that the dungeons, despite being underground, despite being dark and damp and associated with the least loved professor in the school's history, the dungeons were warm. The warmth was Snape's. The warmth had always been Snape's. And the warmth would persist, the book promised, for as long as the castle stood. The castle stood. The castle would stand for 1,000 years more. And for 1,000 years more the warmth would be there, in the walls, in the stone, in the foundations, and the students who walked through the warmth would not know its source, and the not knowing would not diminish the warmth, because warmth did not require recognition. Warmth required only the giving. The giving was done. It was enough.